Daenerys Targaryen stood on the scorched hillside overlooking the waters where Euron Greyjoy's iron-born fleet had decimated her hopes in a single, thunderous volley. The clamor of battle had subsided, replaced by the raw keening of the wind and the distant cries of wounded men. But none of the howling or lamentation in this realm could match Daenerys' own grief. Overhead, the sky felt unbearably empty. Once it was filled by Rhaegal's emerald wings slicing through cloud and sunlight, his roars echoing across bays and battlements alike. Now, all that remained of him were the echoes of memory and a cold, sinking pit in Daenerys' stomach that refused to abate. She remembered the precise moment it happened when the black bolt from Euron's monstrous scorpion had struck Rhaegal in the neck. She had sensed something tear open inside her own soul, as if dragon and rider were bound by more than simple devotion. Rhaegal did not scream as Drogon might have. No, instead, he made a low, guttural groan that reverberated in Daenerys' chest, the sound more chilling for its raw, stunned anguish than any bellow of rage. He faltered, wings flapping in an unsteady circle, and in that fleeting moment, Daenerys prayed, truly prayed, that he would regain balance and rise again. But then came the second bolt and then another. The mighty creature's body twisted in midair, blood arching in a vicious spray before he slammed into the choppy waters. She had cried out as if she could command the sea itself to surrender him, half-mad with disbelief, until she felt Varys' hand pulling at her elbow. The next thing she knew, her retinue was forcing her to retreat, lest Drogon meet the same fate. That night, her loss became the hush that settled over the camp like a funeral pall. Soldiers tended their wounds in grim silence, well aware that the war for the Iron Throne had changed in a heartbeat. Bereft of half her dragons, Daenerys grew quieter, too, though her eyes sparkled with an intensity that bordered on wildness. She took no supper. She spoke only in crisp commands to Grey Worm, Missandei, and the few who dared approach. The wind sweeping through their ranks carried the promise of storms, but none saw Daenerys retire. She prowled the edges of the camp as if tethered by a restless, sleepless fury. She ended by the shore, staring at the wide, moonlit water and listening to the ocean lapping at the corpses of ships. Each wave felt like a heartbeat that grew fainter and fainter, as if the very world was mourning the passing of her green child. Jon Snow found her there in the twilight before dawn. He moved with care, mindful not to startle her in her grief. Their shared truths, him being Aegon Targaryen, her nephew, her lover, had driven a spike between them, but he refused to let that overshadow this moment. This was the woman he cared for, the woman he had bent the knee to, and the woman who had saved his life more times than he could count. And this was also the mother of dragons, shattered by the very world she was trying to claim. He reached out cautiously, his hand brushing her pale hair, which was loose and salty from the sea breeze. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse from the dryness in his throat. "I wish there was anything I could do." She closed her eyes, seemingly mustering words from a well of pain. "They've taken him from me. As they took Viserion, as they've taken so many." Her gaze turned upon Jon, the silver in her hair reflecting the moonlight. "I have lost too many of my children." Jon, for a moment, could offer no solace besides the comfort of his presence. In times past, when Ghost was wounded, his own heart lurched in his chest. He knew it paled in comparison to losing a dragon, a creature so deeply woven into her identity. A kind of helplessness washed over him. "We'll do what we can. We must keep fighting," he said finally, a feeble attempt at hope. Daenerys' voice quivered. "Fight, yes. That is all we do. But Rhaegal," she bit her lip, tears in her eyes. "He can't be gone, Jon. I feel him. I still feel him, as if a part of him clings to this world." Jon watched her, uncertain. He'd heard stories of Targaryen bonds with dragons that transcended ordinary senses, tethered by blood and ancient magic. If Daenerys felt something, perhaps it wasn't only the grief speaking. "Maybe he's trying to tell you something," Jon ventured quietly. "Dragons are bound to us in ways I can't begin to understand." Daenerys nodded slightly. Then, as if an idea took root, she moved past him, her steps almost frantic. Jon followed, questions perched on his lips, but she seemed not to hear him. Daenerys headed up the sloping dunes until they stood where the Dothraki had erected several of their tents. Flames licked at torches planted in the sand, painting the night with flickers of gold and saffron. Between those lights, a shadowy figure emerged, leaning on a staff. He wore red robes trimmed in gold thread, an emblem that caused Jon's memories to stir. The man, tall and slender, turned to greet the Targaryen queen. "I have heard of your loss," the man said. His accent was soft, carrying the lilt of the distant east. "It pains me that another dragon has fallen." Daenerys blinked, uncertain how to respond to a stranger's empathy, especially when red priests and priestesses had vexed her with half-truths and cryptic promises in the past. "Who are you?" she asked, forcibly steadying her voice. He offered a respectful bow. "My name is Moro, a humble servant of Lawler. I come from the temple in Volantis. Word of your plight reached our ears some time ago, and I journeyed here in your name. My services are small, but I offer them without hesitation." Jon had grown wary of any red priest since the days of Melisandre. The memory of her miracles mingled with the memory of her dark extremes, burning children, conjuring shadows. He stepped protectively closer to Daenerys, his posture ready. "What services?" Jon asked, guarded. Moro's pale eyes flicked to Jon. "The great Lord of Light has an interest in the fate of the living and in the triumph over shadow. This is, after all, a realm beset by darkness from every side. We all know what you and your allies have faced. We speak only of giving you the chance to restore what you have lost if the Lord of Light wills it." Daenerys felt her pulse intensify. The memory of Melisandre bringing Jon Snow back to life flared in her mind, a seemingly impossible feat of necromancy. If a red priest could snatch a life from death, might the same be done for a dragon? Yet the notion felt almost too agonizing to consider. "Are you saying?" she trailed off, hardly daring to voice the question. But Moro's gaze, despite its empathy, felt piercing. "There are rituals known to those who have dedicated their lives to the flame. And there is precedent in your house, my queen. The bond between Targaryen and dragon is older than many would believe. Blood and fire, they are your birthright." Her chest tightened. Grief warred with hope until she trembled under the weight of it. If it was possible, how could she not pursue it? Still, she recalled Melisandre's warnings, such power comes at a cost. "Tell me what you need," she said, her voice trembling. "We will do anything." Jon opened his mouth to interject, remembering how Shireen Baratheon had been sacrificed, how others had been burned in the name of Lawler. He could not bear that Daenerys lose herself to some monstrous ritual. But Moro sensed the shape of Jon's concern and spoke calmly. "Blood magic often demands extreme measures," he said. "But this is different. This is Lawler's domain to coax embers back to life. The Lord of Light seeks champions. A dragon, especially a dragon belonging to the Mother of Dragons, would be a beacon in the dark. I will need your permission and the creature's remains." Daenerys gave a grim nod. "The remains lie at the bottom of the sea." "How?" But the red priest merely pressed his lips together, almost smiling with quiet confidence. "There are ways. If he is truly calling out to you as you say, it means a thread connects him to this realm. It is enough for me to begin. We must do this soon, before the spirit passes beyond the horizon of death." So it was, by the time the morning sun streaked the sky in pale orange and pink, that Daenerys found herself standing at the water's edge with Jon, Tyrion, Grey Worm, and the priest Moro among others who watched with apprehension. The tide shifted, unearthing pieces of debris from the shattered fleet. Every wave felt like a mocking refrain, reminding her of Rhaegal's watery tomb. Still, Moro began chanting in a voice that crackled with a power Daenerys did not understand. He lifted his staff, and the ruby mounted at its tip ignited with an inner glow that seemed to intensify with each incantation. Jon kept his eyes on Daenerys, ready to step in if anything went wrong. He too could sense something, an unsettling swirl in the air, charged like the sky before a thunderstorm. Gooseflesh rippled along his arms despite the morning warmth. While his faith in the Red God was tenuous, he could not deny the flickers of raw magic sparking around them. The sea hissed and foamed. For a heartbeat, the sound of wind and water faded into an otherworldly hush. Then the waves abruptly receded from the beach as if pulled by an invisible hand. About 50 paces from where they stood, the ocean parted in a slow, ominous swirl, revealing black sand underneath. People gasped. A heavy shape drifted to the surface, battered and limp, green scales dulled, wings tattered. It was Rhaegal, dragged from the depths. Daenerys' heart clenched to see him in such a state, but her wonder overshadowed the horror. How could this be possible? She felt tears burning her eyes, tears of hope and despair mingled. Moro continued chanting. Smoke like shadows flickered in and out of sight around his feet, coiling about the ruby on his staff. Each phrase he spoke was answered by an almost imperceptible growl in the air. Jon felt the energy tighten, watched as Rhaegal's body was slowly drawn ashore by a force none could see. Daenerys surged forward with a cry, wanting to rush to him, but Grey Worm gently caught her arm. Let the priest finish, he warned, his voice taut. Saltwater trickled from Rhaegal's corpse, forming rivulets across the sand. His eyes were half-lidded, the once bright gold clouded over. The gruesome wounds from the scorpion bolts were still visible, though crusted in dark red. Daenerys' heartbeat throbbed in her ears. She prayed to every god she knew and to those she did not that the Red Priest was not deceiving her. At last, Moro jammed his staff into the sand and let go. The ruby continued to glow. He knelt by the dragon's head, placing his hands upon Rhaegal's snout. Steam hissed from under his palms, and an acrid tang reached the observers as if something were burning. Jon gritted his teeth as he watched, half expecting the priest's flesh to char, but Moro did not flinch. He pressed himself closer, forehead touching Rhaegal's scaly brow. "I seek you in the darkness," Moro intoned, voice echoing strangely against the water. "Return to the realm of flame. Find the fire in your blood. Serve the Lord of Light, that darkness may be banished." The surface of Rhaegal's scales began to shimmer as though lit from underneath by greenish embers. Daenerys felt something stir in her chest, an ache answered by a flicker of warmth. She realized she was holding her breath as a faint pulse tremored under Moro's hands. Then came the slow, labored shudder of Rhaegal's body, as if he was retching out a lungful of seawater. Gasps rippled through the watchers. Grey Worm's grip on Daenerys's arm tightened reflexively. Even Tyrion, silent until then, murmured a curse under his breath. Jon advanced a step, eyes riveted on the twitch of Rhaegal's limbs. He recalled his own journey back from death, of gasping for breath, disoriented in a world he no longer recognized. Seeing it happen to a dragon, a beast so majestic and fierce, made him shiver. Moro maintained his chant, though sweat beaded on his brow. Smoke began to swirl in earnest around his shoulders, and the air thickened with a heat that crackled. Rhaegal's chest heaved once, twice. Then, with a sound like the grinding of enormous stones, the dragon coughed seawater and a thin stream of greenish bile onto the sand. Daenerys tore free from Grey Worm's hold and stumbled forward. She placed a trembling hand on Rhaegal's flank, feeling his scales twitch beneath her fingertips. "Rhaegal," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My sweet child, come back to me." Slowly, Rhaegal's eyelid fluttered. His eye, once clouded, shone faintly gold again. The membrane drew back, and he emitted a low rumble that quavered in the morning air. Jon looked on in awe, goosebumps prickling every inch of his skin. He could barely comprehend what he was witnessing. The watchers behind them murmured prayers and exclamations, too stunned to cheer, too confused to do anything but stare. Moro's chanting slowed, the glow in the ruby dimming by degrees. At last he staggered back, collapsing to his knees. The smoke dissipated, leaving a faint residue of ash in the wind. Rhaegal was breathing. Unsteadily, yes, but each great inhalation expanded his sides. He lifted his head a fraction, as if testing his renewed existence. Daenerys cradled the dragon's jaw, pressing her forehead to the warm, scaled bone. "You're with me," she said, voice choking with emotion. "You're here." Rhaegal exhaled, a gust of heat tinged with acid. His eyes flicked open fully, and a weak warble left his throat. Daenerys let out a ragged sob of relief. Tyrion found himself rubbing at his own eyes, as if disbelieving. Grey Worm looked upon the dragon with a warrior's respect, but also with just a touch of fear, because in that moment, everyone realized the magnitude of what had occurred. Rhaegal, slain by Euron's scorpion bolts, had been returned to life, and the question of what price might be exacted for such a miracle lingered. But for that moment, Daenerys allowed herself the pure joy of her child's heartbeat against her palm. They cleared a space for the dragon on solid ground, constructing a makeshift shelter by repurposing the largest surviving sails into a canopy. Daenerys insisted on staying by Rhaegal's side, unwilling to leave him vulnerable. Like an injured soldier, he needed time to recover from the trauma. Jon observed from a short distance while Moro rested in a tent, exhausted from the ritual's toll. Tyrion fretted about food supplies for a convalescing dragon, while Grey Worm dispatched hunting parties to gather enough to feed him. The camp formed an uneasy circle, half in awe, half in dread, at the sight of the resurrected beast. Jon approached Daenerys after ensuring the men had set up defenses against any sudden attacks. They had no illusions. Euron Greyjoy was still out there on the sea, and Cersei Lannister's forces would remain a threat. "How is he?" Jon asked softly. Daenerys stroked Rhaegal's flank, her expression a blend of maternal devotion and regal confidence. "He's breathing easier now. The wounds on his neck and side are healing slowly, though I fear some might have festered from the salt water." She looked at Jon, and in her eyes he saw the ghosts of heartbreak. "But he's alive. And that's enough for me." Jon rested a hand on the dragon's foreleg, surprised by the heat radiating through the scales. For a beast that had been dead mere hours ago, Rhaegal's body felt thrumming with renewed vitality. A flick of the dragon's tail made Jon jump, but Daenerys merely smiled, a tiny, watery grin. It was a fragile glimmer of hope in their dark world. "We need to be careful," Jon said at length, "to make sure this resurrection didn't come at some terrible cost. Magic can be tricky." She nodded slowly, brushing hair from her face. "I know. But I can't regret it, Jon. Not when my child stirs again." Jon squeezed her shoulder gently. He understood her stance. If there had been a way to bring back Rickon or any of his siblings, would he have refused? He had once refused the Red Woman's attempts to raise others from the dead after his own resurrection, but this felt different, tethered to prophecy and ancient draconic bonds. He felt a slight twinge in his chest, a reminder of that old wound being dead and then not. Did the same confusion plague Rhaegal? Could a dragon even experience such disorientation? "That priest," Jon said, his voice low. "He risked a lot too. I doubt he'll be satisfied just to leave now. He spoke of your dragons serving the Lord of Light. He might want to stay close." Daenerys' expression hardened slightly, though not in anger, more in wary acceptance. "Whatever his aims, he's done me a service I can never repay. I'll treat him with the respect he's due. But I won't be manipulated." Jon's jaw tightened. "Good," he said, the single syllable carrying layers of agreement. He stepped closer to Rhaegal's enormous head. The dragon regarded him, slow and methodical, tilting his battered horns. When Jon had first ridden Rhaegal into battle, that bond had felt tenuous, overshadowed by Daenerys' closer tie to the creature. But now something new shimmered in Rhaegal's golden gaze. Jon realized with a jolt that he recognized it, the same primal acceptance he had felt at the wall when Ghost first looked at him, or the moment Drogon let him approach in Dragonstone's courtyard. Perhaps death and rebirth had aligned Rhaegal with Jon in some mysterious way. Tentatively, Jon placed his palm against the ridged scales of Rhaegal's muzzle, feeling the creature's hot breath against his face. He expected resistance, but Rhaegal merely blinked, allowing the contact. There was a flash in Daenerys' eyes, a hope or something like relief. She recalled the swirling stories of Valyrian blood and the notion that Jon, being a Targaryen, was destined to bond with a dragon. She had not resented that bond, even if it complicated her sense of identity as the only true dragon rider left. Now, however, the moment felt different, as if Rhaegal himself was seeking out Jon's presence to confirm something essential. Daenerys parted her lips to speak, but before she could, Rhaegal made a soft rumbling. Jon pulled back slightly, startled, but Daenerys recognized it as a gentle request. Rhaegal wanted to stand. Laboriously, the dragon folded his wings, gathering himself on shaky limbs. Muscles bunched beneath glossy scales as Rhaegal forced himself upright, towering over the camp. A hush fell across the nearby soldiers who paused in their tasks to watch the dragon's miraculous recovery. Daenerys placed a guiding hand on Rhaegal's shoulder, encouraging him with soft, murmured words in Valyrian. The dragon hissed through parted jaws, as if complaining of soreness, but step by step he ambled a short distance, staggering in a circle. He flapped his battered wings once, just enough for the wind to stir dust and hair. He was not yet ready to fly, but the movement spoke volumes. Life was in him again. Jon joined Daenerys, walking beside the dragon's chest. "He's strong," Jon said, a note of admiration. "Strong," Daenerys echoed, "and determined. But he'll need time." She glanced at Jon, then up at Rhaegal's head. "You feel it too, don't you? Something about him and you. You share a bond that's more pronounced than it was before." Jon hesitated. His time with Rhaegal earlier had been brief, overshadowed by war strategies and the Night King's threat. Then Rhaegal was stolen from him, mortally wounded. Now, it seemed as though the dragon had awakened with a fresh sense of kinship like TW. Oh, souls forging a new thread. Jon recalled how Drogon had singled him out, letting him close. But Rhaegal's acceptance carried an added intimacy, one that whispered of deeper recognition. "I do," Jon admitted, stroking a line of scales. "But I'd never challenge your place with him." Daenerys' gaze softened. "I know. You are of my blood, whether we wish it or not." The dragon sensed that. "And perhaps Rhaegal is trying to tell us something." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "He might want you as a rider, Jon." It was no small thing to become a rider of dragons. Jon felt the swirl of old anxieties, the question of his claim to the throne, the friction between Daenerys' supporters and the Northerners, the entire realm's precarious future. Yet he could not deny the surge of wonder the notion stirred in him. To ride a dragon was to wield an unfathomable power and a tremendous responsibility. "If that is what he wants, I'll do what's needed," Jon murmured. "But you'll always be the mother of dragons." She smiled faintly, a brief but genuine smile that seemed to lift her spirits. "Thank you," she said, reaching for his hand. Their fingers interlocked, a silent truce in the ongoing conflict between love, duty, and destiny. Rhaegal lowered his head then, nudging Daenerys gently as if reminding them he was still there. She laughed softly, an unexpected sound after so much sorrow. "We'll care for you, my child," she said, resting her other hand on his snout. "And you'll grow strong again." For days, the camp remained on high alert, expecting another strike from Euron's fleet or scouts from King's Landing. Soldiers rotated patrols while the Unsullied fortified the perimeter with spiked barricades and watchtowers improvised from broken ship masts. Tyrion, unsettled by the vulnerability of their position, pressed for an immediate relocation. "We can't stay here indefinitely," he argued, pacing the central pavilion with his usual restless energy. "That mad pirate could return at any moment. We've lost enough men, and we can't risk losing Rhaegal again, especially not after everything." Daenerys, seated with Rhaegal poised despite the tension, nodded in somber agreement. The flickering candlelight danced over her silver hair. "We'll move as soon as Rhaegal can manage a short flight. Marching overland to Dragonstone or the mainland would take time, and we'd be exposed. The sea is too dangerous now, thanks to Euron's scorpions. Perhaps we can chart a new route, but only after we secure Rhaegal." Jon stood nearby, arms folded. He had spent much of his time tending to the dragon alongside Daenerys. Grey Worm and others worked tirelessly, hauling carcasses of deer and the occasional ox from local villages, offering them to Rhaegal in daily feedings. The resurrected dragon ate heartily, though the motion of chewing sometimes brought out a low rumble of pain. "He's improving," Jon said. "He tries to extend his wings fully each morning, as if testing the air. He'll fly soon enough." Across from Jon, Varys sat with his fingers steepled, eyes narrowed in thought. There's no telling how the people will react to stories of a dragon brought back from the dead. Some might hail it as a miracle, but others will no doubt fear it as dark sorcery. "We must be prepared for rumors." Daenerys' expression hardened. "Rumors will spread regardless. All that matters is that we reclaim our advantage. Cersei will not be idle." Tyrion grimaced. "Which is why we should go. It's safer to risk the overland route than to stay pinned here. If we lose Rhaegal again, no Red Priest might be able to bring him back a second time." Jon spoke up. "We could move in a few days." Moro said he needs to perform a final ritual to stabilize Rhaegal's condition. He fears that the trauma of death might leave a wound on the dragon's spirit. At that, Varys raised an eyebrow. "And what does that entail?" "It's less drastic than the resurrection itself," Jon answered. He mentioned it's more like a blessing, a sealing of the bond. "He'll need Daenerys, and possibly me, present." Daenerys looked from Jon to Varys and Tyrion, the candlelight reflecting in her violet eyes. "Then we'll permit it. Whatever ensures Rhaegal's full recovery, we do it. After that, we strike camp and head north to Dragonstone. We can plan our next move once we're safe behind stone walls." It was agreed. Preparations began for departure, with wagons loaded and a few serviceable ships readied in the cove for supplies that could not be easily carried by land. All the while, Rhaegal's strength returned piece by piece, though his flight muscles remained tender. Daenerys and Jon both sensed the undercurrent of change in the dragon. He moved differently now, with a certain wariness in his gaze, as if bridging two worlds, life and death. Yet his watchful eyes never left Daenerys for long, and he often allowed Jon to come close, the bond between them stretching and deepening each day. Finally, on the eve of their planned departure, Moro called Daenerys and Jon to the quiet stretch of coastline where Rhaegal had been resurrected. Moonlight silvered the sand, and the crash of waves served as a metronome for the priest's chanting. The night air was crisp, with clouds scuttling across the sky. Rhaegal loomed nearby, half resting on folded legs. Moro motioned for Daenerys and Jon to place their hands on the dragon. They did so, palms pressed to the warm scales that vibrated with a subdued hum. "Lord of Light," Moro began, voice low but resonant. "You have guided Rhaegal back to the realm of breathing. Now we ask your blessing upon him, that he may stand in the face of darkness. We ask your blessing upon his riders, that they may lead the living in this war for the dawn." Daenerys felt Jon flinch slightly at the phrase "his riders," but neither withdrew. Rhaegal's breathing deepened, a low thrumming in his chest. Moro lifted a small brazier of coals, glowing red-hot, and passed his hand over them in a slow, deliberate gesture. A faint wind rose off the ocean, toying with Daenerys's hair. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself sink into the moment. She thought of everything: her birth on Dragonstone, the promise of the Iron Throne, the tragedy of her family, the dire warnings from the north, and the countless people who looked to her for deliverance. The swirl of it all coalesced into a single trembling wish: that she might be the queen who protects her people and frees them from tyranny, not one who conquers only to lose all she loves. Jon felt the old, tingling sensation in his chest, reminiscent of when Melisandre's magic had jolted him back to life. It wasn't precisely the same. There was no sense of cold emptiness, but rather a slow, burning warmth that expanded across his ribcage. He gritted his teeth. Even so, he refused to pull away. The heat rose, pulsing outward through his fingertips, as if traveling from Rhaegal's body into his. Moro's chanting quickened, the words foreign and guttural. The priest threw a pinch of powder onto the coals, sending sparks arcing into the air. Rhaegal let out a deep rumble that reverberated through Daenerys and Jon. Then the dragon lifted his head and belched a narrow plume of flame into the sky, scattering the clouds overhead. An instant later, the entire camp saw that spire of fire rising into the night, a beacon of savage, glorious life. For a moment, Daenerys's vision blurred as she felt Rhaegal's heartbeat echo in her mind. She glimpsed fleeting images, blazing wings beating against the sky, a sense of boundless freedom, and a swirl of ancient memory. The shriek of a dragon in darkness, the silhouettes of old Valyria in the distance, and an abiding loyalty to the Targaryen blood. Then it was gone, leaving her gasping, but somehow invigorated. She glanced at Jon, who was breathing heavily, meeting her gaze with awe etched across his face. Moro lowered the brazier, voice returning to a calm monotone. "It is done," he said, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "Rhaegal's spirit is bound to this world. He shall serve the flame. May he aid you in your cause." Daenerys exhaled shakily, trying to gather her composure. She gave Moro a respectful nod. "You have my thanks, Red Priest. You have done me a kindness I will never forget." Jon struggled to form words, finally managing, "Thank you." He felt drained, yet energized, a contradiction he could not articulate. Moro inclined his head. "I have fulfilled my purpose, yet I remain yours to command. The night is dark, and the war is not yet won. My prayers will follow you." Daenerys gently placed a hand over Rhaegal's snout once more. The dragon's eye rolled toward her, pupils narrowing in the moonlight. She felt the bond renewed, surging with a warmth that defied the night's chill. "Let us depart for Dragonstone in the morning," she whispered to Jon, to Rhaegal, and to herself. "We'll find our strength there." And so the ritual ended, leaving the three figures, queen, king that never wanted to be, and dragon, on the moonlit shore, sealed in a new covenant that could alter the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. In the distance, the sea shimmered with dark possibilities, and a hush of destiny fell over them like a shroud. At dawn, a cautious exodus began. Daenerys rose earlier than most, standing with her cloak swirling in the breeze. She watched as the unsullied Dothraki broke down the camp with silent efficiency. Tyrion issued instructions while Varys busied himself with logistics. Davos, who had arrived the previous night by a small boat from White Harbor with a handful of Northman reinforcements, quietly conferred with Jon. The tension was palpable not only because of the threat from Euron's fleet but also because traveling with a newly resurrected dragon felt like tempting fate. Rhaegal stood on a high dune, gazing at the horizon as if measuring the distance. The wounds on his side, though still visible, had closed, leaving dark scars. His wings, once tattered, were now strong enough to carry him short distances, but a full flight to Dragonstone remained untested. Daenerys approached him, laying a comforting hand on his flank. "Are you ready?" she murmured, remembering the sensation of flight with Drogon, of wind roaring in her ears and the earth shrinking below. Rhaegal rumbled quietly as if answering her and extended his wings, which flapped twice in a show of strength. The sudden gust toppled a nearby stack of crates, causing Davos to yank his cap down tighter with a grimace. Daenerys stroked the dragon's side, though she could not contain her anxious energy. The plan was for her to ride Drogon, who circled overhead with Rhaegal impatience while Jon attempted to ride Rhaegal. If all went smoothly, they would serve as aerial guardians for the land column. The wounded and some supplies would take the surviving ships along the coastline, always wary of Euron's ambushes. It was a risky, multi-pronged route, but they hoped splitting their forces would minimize vulnerability. Jon approached with measured steps. The hilt of Longclaw jutted from his hip, a familiar weight. He paused at the sight of Rhaegal's gleaming eye upon him. A memory of his first flight with the dragon flared, how unnatural and exhilarating it felt, as if gravity itself had been undone. Rhaegal dipped his head in a sign of acceptance. Was it possible the dragon truly wanted him astride again? Daenerys caught Jon's gaze and nodded. He won't accept anyone else. He's chosen you, Jon. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned in him: pride, fear, humility. But he understood the necessity. They would be safer with two dragons in the sky watching for threats. Slowly, Jon placed a foot in the stirrup-like arrangement that Grey Worm's men had fashioned as a crude harness, then hoisted himself atop Rhaegal's back. The dragon stiffened momentarily, but then relaxed, adjusting to the rider's weight. Jon clutched at the ridges of scale near Rhaegal's shoulders, feeling them shift under his hands. Daenerys moved to mount Drogon, who landed with an ear-splitting roar that made the horses below rear and whinny in panic. Dothraki horsemen hurried to calm their mounts, shouting to each other. Tyrion nearly stumbled over a tent peg, cursing under his breath. But Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's colossal frame with the ease of a practiced rider. She looked across the gap to Jon, a spark of encouragement in her eyes. "We fly when you're ready." Jon took a breath. He pressed his palm to the side of Rhaegal's neck. "Let's do this." He felt a flicker of reassurance from the beast, as if Rhaegal recognized him in some profound sense. It took only a subtle tightening of Jon's knees and a forward lean for Rhaegal to gather himself. With a powerful lunge, the dragon launched into the air, wings thundering. Jon grit his teeth as the ground fell away, heart hammering in his chest. Rhaegal wobbled once, perhaps from residual injury or from reacclimating to flight after his resurrection, but then stabilized, rising alongside Drogon, who roared a triumphant greeting. The early sunlight gilded their scales, Drogon's black appearing almost bronze, and Rhaegal's green gleaming with new luster despite the scars. Below, the column of Unsullied and Dothraki raised cheers and war cries. Wary gazes also trailed skyward, for not all of them were comfortable with the idea of a dead dragon returned to life. But the sight of the two dragons patrolling overhead did wonders for morale, especially with Euron's scorpions lurking somewhere out at sea. If an ambush occurred, at least the horde would not be caught helpless. The flight began slowly, each beat of Rhaegal's wings a test of endurance. Daenerys guided Drogon in a wide circle, scanning the horizon. Jon followed, gingerly coaxing Rhaegal into formation. The wind roared in his ears, the smell of salt water and churned air filling his nose. Despite the seriousness of their mission, he couldn't help the exhilaration that sparked within him. Something about riding Rhaegal felt like returning to a place he'd never actually been, but somehow knew. Was it the Targaryen blood? Was it the bond with the beast that had been reforged by magic? He spared a glance downward. The land column stretched out along the coastline, a motley array of unsullied spears, Dothraki riders, wagons of supplies, and their other allies. Farther out at sea, the few ships they had left sailed in a cautious line, ever vigilant for Euron's silhouette on the horizon. Memories of the last ambush, Rhaegal screaming, bolts flying, tightened Jon's chest. He guided Rhaegal closer to Drogon, letting Daenerys see the concern in his eyes. She shouted over the wind, "Keep watch to the east. If Euron appears, we'll see them first from above." He nodded, scanning the glinting waters, but no sails broke the ocean's surface. For a time, they soared in relative peace, miles sliding beneath them. Rhaegal wheeled once or twice, testing the currents, and Jon felt him strain in flight. He was healing, yes, but not fully. By midday, Rhaegal's efforts flagged, and Jon guided him into a gentle descent. They landed near a grassy clearing sheltered by rocky outcroppings where the ground force regrouped. Daenerys and Drogon circled overhead, continuing the aerial watch while Rhaegal rested. Men hustled to feed him fresh goats, though he only devoured half before slumping into a cat-like position to doze. Jon dismounted with a soft thud, knees trembling, shoulders burning from holding on so tightly. Tyrion approached, panting from the hard ride on horseback. "How did it feel?" Tyrion asked, eyeing the exhausted dragon. "Managing him all right?" Jon exhaled. "He's holding up, but you can tell he's still wounded." He stroked the dragon's flank. "He's fighting to keep up, and I'm trying not to push him too hard." Tyrion gave a thoughtful nod. "We'll have to break journey frequently then. Better that than losing him midair." Jon agreed, though a hint of frustration lingered. They needed to reach Dragonstone swiftly, but they also could not risk pushing Rhaegal beyond his limits. He watched the men constructing a makeshift perimeter, planting sharpened stakes at intervals. Others roamed the outskirts, searching for fresh water. The tension in the camp crackled like a thundercloud. Any moment, an ambush could spring from the coastline or from some hidden cove. He tried to stifle the uneasy feeling creeping through him, but could not. War was upon them again, no matter how many times they tried to regroup. Cersei or Euron or some other threat was waiting. Daenerys landed Drogon near dusk, the setting sun gilding the horizon with tangerine hues. She dismounted gracefully, greeting Jon with a weary smile. He noticed her trembling legs. Keeping Drogon aloft all day wasn't easy either. Together, they approached Rhaegal, who perked up slightly from his rest. The day's flight had tested him, but he seemed determined to keep going. Daenerys patted his snout. "We're almost home, my darling." Jon felt a knot form in his stomach at the word home. Where was his home? Winterfell? With Daenerys? He banished the thought, focusing on the present. "We can push for Dragonstone tomorrow if he's up to it. Better to fly the last leg rather than stay out in the open. No telling what Euron's men are planning." She nodded in agreement, summoning Grey Worm with a gesture. The stoic commander approached, awaiting orders. "Spread word," Daenerys said. "We leave at first light. Make sure everyone has enough food, water, and rest. This last stretch might be the most dangerous." Grey Worm saluted, stepping away to relay her commands. Around the makeshift encampment, fires began to crackle, warding off the gathering darkness. Soldiers removed armor to tend to sores and bruises. Horses drank from puddles. Davos hammered out some issue with a broken wheel. And somewhere in the throng, Moro quietly burned incense, whispering prayers to Lawler while the distant murmur of the ocean lulled them all toward an uneasy sleep. Jon lingered near Daenerys, the warmth of her presence comforting him against the creeping dread of night. She glanced sideways at him. "You should rest," she said gently. "Tomorrow we need you strong." He nodded, stifling a yawn. "You too." They shared a glance that bristled with unspoken questions about the future, about the lines of succession, about the secrets that weighed on their hearts. But fatigue dulled the sharpest edges, and for tonight, at least, they let those worries lie dormant. They parted ways, each slipping into a restless sleep filled with dragon wings and the faint promise of flames. At the first hint of dawn, they broke camp and prepared for the final push. Rhaegal stretched his wings as if sensing the nearness of their destination. Daenerys and Drogon took to the sky first, scanning for threats, while Jon coaxed Rhaegal to follow. Though a dull ache lined his brow, lack of proper sleep, perhaps Jon felt a flicker of hope at the thought of Dragonstone. From there, they could regroup, strike alliances, and plan the final assault on King's Landing. The Iron Throne seemed within sight, yet so many obstacles remained. He could almost taste the tension in the air. They soared over jagged cliffs and rolling fields that bordered the sea, the water below swirling in gray-green currents. The morning sun glimmered on Rhaegal's scales, highlighting the places where fresh scars laced his belly. Daenerys and Jon continued in a slow, steady flight, the ground forces maintaining a brisk pace below. After an hour, the ancient silhouette of Dragonstone emerged on the horizon, its volcanic cliffs rising in spires of black rock. The fortress perched high like a petrified gargoyle. Eel, gazing out over the sea. Jon remembered the earlier days there, finding dragonglass, forging an alliance. It felt like a lifetime ago. As they approached, Daenerys and Drogon angled downward, circling the outer walls. Jon followed with Rhaegal, feeling the dragon's breath come faster. The fortress gates stood open, manned by the handful of soldiers left behind to maintain the stronghold. They cheered at the sight of the returning queen and her dragons, though their cheers faltered in the same breath as they took in Rhaegal's scars, the evidence of mortal wounds. Whispers of the dragon's resurrection already floated among them like a ghost story come to life. But Daenerys did not shrink from the stairs. Her posture was regal, resolute. They settled on the wide courtyard, battered but triumphant. Dothraki riders and Unsullied poured in through the gates, while Tyrion and Davos organized them into temporary garrisons. Within minutes, the courtyard buzzed with activity. Daenerys walked among them, issuing commands, ensuring that everyone had lodging, that the storerooms were stocked, that the walls were properly manned. Rhaegal stood near Drogon, trembling with fatigue, but obviously relieved to be on solid ground. Jon slid off the dragon's back, landing with a grunt, knees wobbly from the long flight. Tyrion approached, eyebrows raised. "You look like a man who could use a stiff drink." Jon managed a dry chuckle. "I won't say no. But business first. We need to lock down the harbor. Euron could track us here." Tyrion's mouth twitched. "Already being seen to. We'll set watchers along the cliffs." He studied Jon for a moment. The men, some of them are uneasy. Resurrecting a dragon is hardly an everyday occurrence. "I know," Jon admitted. "We'll handle it. The important thing is we're stronger with Rhaegal alive." Tyrion nodded, then started to walk away, presumably to handle more administrative chaos. But he paused. "I never had the chance to say what Daenerys did, and that Red Priest, it was a monumental risk. I'm glad it paid off." Jon inhaled slowly. "So am I." Tyrion left, and Jon turned to find Daenerys comforting Rhaegal, running her hand along his neck. The dragon lowered his head, eyes half-lidded. Grey Worm approached from behind, saluting. "We've secured the perimeter, Your Grace," he said, voice crisp. "Shall I station scouts beyond the island?" Daenerys nodded. "Yes, and dispatch ravens to our allies. Tell them we need to coordinate an attack on King's Landing before Cersei can strengthen her scorpion defenses further." Grey Worm bowed and left to carry out her orders. Daenerys sighed, letting a hint of weariness show in the line of her shoulders. When she spotted Jon, her expression softened. "We're back here, once again," she said, gesturing to the walls of Dragonstone. "But so much has changed." Jon approached, standing beside her. He glanced up at Rhaegal, who shifted slightly, curling his tail around his body. "Much has changed," Jon repeated softly. "But you got your child back, Daenerys. That alone is worth all the trials." She pressed her lips together. "He's more than my child now, Jon. He's yours too, in a way. Do you sense it?" She reached out a hand, and Jon took it, feeling the fine bones of her fingers tense within his grip. "I do," he answered, recalling the flood of warmth from the final ritual. "But he's still your dragon. I won't claim otherwise." A small, sad smile curved her lips. "We share him. Perhaps that's how it was always meant to be. The Targaryens used to have many dragons, many riders. My ancestors believed in a bond that transcended the individual." Her gaze flicked away, lost in thought. "But there's so few of us left now." They stood in contemplative silence, letting the sea breeze tug at their clothes. Above them, clouds parted enough for sunlight to wash the courtyard. Soldiers bustled around them, unloading supplies, stacking barrels, tending to the horses. Tyrion's voice drifted across the yard, barking instructions. Rhaegal huffed a tired breath, then laid his head against the flagstones as if succumbing to a well-deserved sleep. Jon murmured, "I wish it didn't have to be like this. War, people dying, dragons being hunted from the sky. If there were a way to end it peacefully." Daenerys pulled her hand from his, crossing her arms. "I once believed I could free the realm from tyrants without resorting to tyranny myself. But the more I fight, the more brutality I see, the more I question if the ends truly justify the means." She paused, swallowing back an emotional swell. "But Rhaegal's return gives me hope. As long as he breathes, we have a chance to shape the realm differently. We have a symbol of what we stand for, life in the face of death, freedom in the face of oppression." Jon reached out to touch her shoulder. "We'll make it right. Together." She closed her eyes. "Together," she echoed. For that moment, at least, unity bound them, two Targaryens battered by fate, standing guard over a resurrected dragon. The future was uncertain, the wars ahead perilous, but in the hush of Dragonstone's courtyard, they held onto each other and the fragile promise that victory might yet be earned. Days slid by in a blur of preparation. Dragonstone's castle had once been a Targaryen stronghold, and it seemed to welcome Daenerys' return. Under her orders, blacksmiths hammered day and night, forging new weapons. Tunnels once abandoned were cleared of rubble, repurposed as storage for grain and arms. The Great Hall saw councils of war nearly every evening, with Daenerys at the head, Jon at her side, Tyrion pacing, Varys whispering advice, and Grey Worm standing vigilant. Davos added his measured counsel, well aware of the precarious alliances at play. Rhaegal continued to heal, regaining strength faster than expected. The scars across his flank grew fainter each day, his scales regaining a lustrous sheen. When he stretched his wings, the muscles rippled without the hitch of pain. He devoured livestock with renewed appetite, his roars echoing through the cliffside. Each day, Daenerys and Jon would take him for short flights around Dragonstone, weaving through sea mists and basalt spires, ensuring he grew stronger and more confident in the air. To the soldiers stationed on the ramparts, the sight of two dragons in flight, Drogon and Rhaegal, was both awe-inspiring and sobering. It reminded them of the unstoppable might once wielded by House Targaryen, now rekindled after centuries of dormancy. Yet, for all their cautious optimism, a sense of storm clouds gathering weighted the atmosphere. Reports trickled in from scouts and ravens. Euron's fleet patrolled the waters near King's Landing, with newly mounted scorpions rumored to be more advanced than before. Cersei had hired more mercenaries, the Golden Company swelling with fresh recruits. Rumors circulated that Qyburn continued his dark experiments, possibly on the captured Missandei, though those rumors were vague and unconfirmed, driving Daenerys nearly mad with worry. Jon watched the spiral of her rage, remembering how the news of Rhaegal's death had once ignited her fury. Would the threat of losing another dragon, or the possible execution of her dear friend, push her to extremes? Late one night, unable to sleep, Jon wandered the halls of Dragonstone. The walls were thick with centuries of Targaryen history, carved dragons twisting around pillars and torches casting dancing shadows. Eventually, he found himself near the old war table where Stannis Baratheon once plotted his doomed campaigns. It was a massive carved relief of Westeros, the edges chipped and worn by time. Daenerys stood across from him, her hands braced on the table, eyes fixed on the miniature representation of King's Landing. He paused, uncertain whether to disturb her, but she sensed him and spoke without turning her head. I think about it every day, how I'll take that city, how I'll break the wheel once and for all. But the cost, is it always so high? Her voice trembled on the edge of bitterness. Jon exhaled, stepping closer. We can try to minimize suffering. Tyrion believes a siege with precise strikes might force them to surrender. She gave a wry smile. Cersei will never surrender, not willingly. She'll use innocence as shields. She'll bait me to burn the city. And if I do, I'm the Mad King's daughter all over again. Jon placed a hand on hers. You're not your father. You saved a city once, Meereen. You didn't burn it to the ground, you ended its tyranny. Her gaze snapped to him, shadows flickering in her violet eyes. I can't repeat the mistakes I made there. Westeros is not Essos. The lords here are cunning. They'd rather watch me fail than support my claim. She studied the carved map. If Rhaegal hadn't been resurrected, I would have marched on King's Landing already, flanked by Drogon's fire, in a storm of rage. But now I feel I must protect him at all costs. I won't lose him again. Jon squeezed her fingers. We'll plan carefully. Rhaegal and Drogon both will be guarded. We'll root out Euron's fleet first, ensure the skies are safe. Then we'll corner Cersei. She nodded reluctantly, letting silence stretch between them. Then, quietly, she added, sometimes I wonder if the Red Priest's magic came with a price we haven't seen yet. Jon felt a chill. He remembered how his own resurrection had left him haunted, changed. The memory of death could warp a man's heart, or so Melisandre once hinted. What did it do to a dragon's mind? I think the price is responsibility, Jon answered, and we have to bear it. Daenerys' lips parted, but she did not speak further. Instead, she lifted her free hand and traced the carved outline of King's Landing. Jon imagined the city's labyrinthine streets, the Red Keep looming above them all. His chest tightened with the knowledge that the final conflict was on the horizon. Their conversation trailed off into a hush that carried both dread and anticipation. The entire realm seemed to hold its breath. Morning came with a cry of alarm from the ramparts. Jon and Daenerys, roused from sleep, rushed up the winding steps to the top of the castle walls. The wind whipped their cloaks as they reached the parapet. From that vantage point, they saw a single ship limping into Dragonstone's bay, sails torn, hull battered. The men on the walls shouted frantic signals to the harbor. Tyrion emerged beside them, breathless from sprinting. It's one of ours, he said, squinting at the battered flag. They've come from the southern waters. Daenerys' heart pounded. Scout vessel. Yes. Likely carrying news. But by the looks of that damage, it's not good. Jon exchanged a tense glance with Daenerys. We'll go down to meet them. They descended to the courtyard, which buzzed with activity as soldiers readied for any potential threat. The battered ship docked and a gangplank was lowered. A handful of survivors staggered off, faces gaunt with exhaustion. Their captain, an older man with a salt and pepper beard, dropped to one knee before the queen. Your Grace, he gasped. We barely made it. Daenerys motioned for him to stand, her eyes sweeping over the man's torn clothes, the blood staining his arm. What happened? She demanded gently. He swallowed. Euron's fleet, they're not far. They ambushed us off the gullet. Bigger ships now, more scorpions than before. We were outnumbered. Most of our vessels sank. Tyrion cursed under his breath. Jon felt a surge of grim realization. Cersei was closing in, systematically tightening the noose. Daenerys schooled her features, though fury sparkled in her eyes. How many were lost? Half a dozen ships at least, the captain replied, voice shaking. Any survivors might be captured or drowned. Euron's men were celebrating, Your Grace. They said if the Dragon Queen dares approach by sea, she'll watch her children die all over again. A hush fell around them. Rhaegal, as if sensing the tension, rumbled in his resting place near the courtyard's edge. Drogon, perched atop a high turret, let out a low growl that echoed down the stone. Soldiers stiffened, gripping their weapons. Daenerys' fists clenched at her sides. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away, face twisting with anger. He wants me to come, she said, voice trembling. He wants to lure me out. He wants me enraged. Tyrion stepped closer. We must be strategic. If we charge his fleet head-on with all those scorpions. Daenerys squeezed her eyes shut, breathing sharply. Jon felt the swirl of her emotions, remembering how she once burned a column of Lannister soldiers to prove a point. That same fire smoldered now. We'll not fly blindly into his trap, she said at last, though her eyes still glittered with wrath. But we cannot let him terrorize us. We have 2 dragons now alive strong. We can't cower behind these walls forever. Tyrion hesitated. Maybe there's a way to draw his fleet out, force him into a disadvantage. Jon spoke up. The painted table. We'll form a plan before we do anything rash. Daenerys snapped her gaze to him, eyes narrowing, but then she exhaled, tension easing from her posture. She gave a curt nod. Yes. Gather the council. We'll plan. But Euron Greyjoy will pay for what he's done. The battered captain bowed once more, relief flooding his expression now that his warning had been delivered. He stumbled away to receive medical attention while Tyrion went to summon the advisors. Daenerys turned to Jon, voice quavering with repressed fury. They keep taking from me, Jon. My children, my people. If I don't strike back, more will die. If I do, they call me the Mad King's daughter. Jon caught her trembling hands. We'll handle it together, he said firmly. You're not alone in this. She held his gaze, some of the anger dissolving into weary determination. Come, she said. Let's see what the others propose. With that, they headed inside to the painted table, their hearts heavy yet resolute, their shared burdens intensifying in a realm trembling on the brink of war. The council gathered in the dim glow of torches and candles. The painted table, carved in the shape of Westeros, provided a stark reminder of the realm they hoped to save or conquer, depending on one's perspective. Daenerys stood at the head, flanked by Jon and Tyrion. Varys, Grey Worm, Davos, and Moro all attended, each bearing different insights or agendas. Tyrion tapped a finger on the miniature marker representing Euron's fleet. They're here, patrolling these waters south and east of King's Landing. If we approach by sea, we'll be peppered with scorpion bolts. Even dragons can't dodge them all. Daenerys pursed her lips. Attacking from the air is still our best chance, if we can catch them unawares. Varys cleared his throat. As you know, subtlety might serve us better. If we lure Euron out of the Scorpion's vantage points, perhaps into shallower waters, we can force his fleet into a bottleneck. Davos scratched his beard. We could use smaller, faster ships as decoys, draw him away while the dragons strike from behind. Jon interjected, his tone guarded. That risks lives. Euron's not a fool. He'll see through a simple ruse. Moro, who had been silent until then, inclined his head. The Lord of Light sees all possibilities. Sometimes an illusion of weakness can compel overconfidence in our foes. Rhaegal's resurrection has given you a powerful advantage, but it must be wielded carefully. Daenerys' gaze flicked to the Red Priest. What do you suggest? Moro's pale eyes glinted. If Euron believes Rhaegal is still weak, if he believes the dragon's resurrection incomplete, he might overreach. Let him think you dare not risk open combat, that your dragon is too frail. When he advances, you strike. A slow smile found Daenerys' lips. Oh, feigned vulnerability. He'll think he can finish what he started. Tyrion's eyes lit up with cautious approval. We could spread misinformation, let slip that Rhaegal still can't fly properly. Perhaps create the illusion he's near death. Davos nodded slowly. We'd need to be convincing, but if Euron believes an easy kill awaits, he might sail into a position where the dragons can swoop in from 2 sides. One dragon might be shot at, but not both. Jon exhaled, tension coiling in his shoulders. It could work, but we must be prepared for heavy casualties. Grey Worm's face was a mask of stoicism. The Unsullied will follow wherever you command, Your Grace. Daenerys looked around the table. Then we have a plan. We'll leak word that Rhaegal is gravely injured, that he can barely fly. We'll keep him out of sight for the next few days, pretend he's grounded. Then we'll send out a few decoy ships, making it seem like we're trying a desperate supply run or something equally vulnerable. When Euron appears, we unleash Drogon and Rhaegal from above. We must ensure we have archers and catapults on the shore to mop up any survivors. Tyrion clasped his hands. It's a gamble, but it might end Euron's threat once and for all. Daenerys lifted her chin, regal confidence edging her voice. Then let's begin. Spread the whispers. Make it convincing. The council disbanded, each member hastening to fulfill their part in the strategy. Jon lingered, catching Daenerys' eye. This is dangerous, he murmured. Euron might bring more scorpions than we anticipate. She nodded gravely. I know, but we can't let him box us in any longer. I've come too far to let him keep me from what's mine. Jon studied her for a moment, pondering the fierce ambition in her gaze. He remembered the kind-hearted woman who had fought against the White Walkers who freed slaves in Meereen. That person was still there, he believed, but the fires of war had tempered her into something harder. Still, for the realm's sake, they had to proceed. Then I'll be with you, he said. Rhaegal and I will do our part. She reached out, clasping his hand briefly. Thank you. Let us end this threat once and for all. Word spread with practiced subtlety. Varys' whisperers slipped among dockworkers, traveling peddlers, and even some captive men who were quietly allowed to escape with tall tales of the resurrected dragon's dire condition. At the same time, Daenerys kept Rhaegal hidden in a large cavern beneath Dragonstone, a place where she once hid her dragons in the early days of her conquest. Only a select few were allowed near him, and rumors circulated that the dragon was barely clinging to life. Meanwhile, Drogon continued to be seen, patrolling the skies to maintain an image that Daenerys still had at least one battle-ready dragon. At last, Tyrion orchestrated the decoy, 3 small ships loaded with minor goods and a handful of volunteers. They set sail from Dragonstone under the cover of dawn, heading in the direction of King's Landing but keeping close to the coast. The plan was to appear vulnerable, enticing Euron's fleet to emerge. Soldiers hid in the ship's holds, ready to fight if boarded, though they were fully aware many might perish. Their goal was to serve as bait. Meanwhile, Daenerys, Jon, and the 2 dragons waited behind the rocky spires of a nearby island, prepared to strike once Euron revealed himself. The day of the trap dawned with a stiff breeze rattling the rigging of anchored ships. Daenerys felt her heart pounding as she stood on a rocky outcrop, gazing at the distant sails of the decoy vessels. Drogon crouched beside her, tail lashing the ground, eager for battle. Farther along the shore, Rhaegal waited with Jon, out of sight. The tension was excruciating, every minute stretching like an hour. After what felt like an eternity, a faint horn blast echoed over the water. One of the decoy ships raised an urgent signal. Tyrion, who was peering through a borrowed Myrish lens, muttered, "There, on the horizon, Euron's fleet." Daenerys' mouth went dry. She snapped her gaze to Jon, who nodded, signaling he was ready. In the distance, black-sailed warships slid into view, a monstrous silhouette of towering masts and iron spikes. Closer they came, fanning out to encircle the decoy ships. Daenerys forced herself to wait, to let them commit. She spotted the faint glint of scorpion heads swiveling, seeking a target. Euron's personal ship, the Silence, led the formation, its hull festooned with ominous decorations from past victories. Her hands clenched the hilt of her sword until her knuckles turned white. The moment of truth approached. Suddenly, the still air broke with the whistle of a scorpion bolt streaking across the sky. One of the decoy ships lurched, the bolt skewering its mast. Sailors shouted. Euron's war horns bellowed. The trap was sprung. Daenerys turned to Tyrion and Davos, who stood with a detachment of archers on the cliffside. "When they're fully committed, rain fire on them," she ordered. They saluted, barking commands to ready the siege weapons they'd positioned along the crags. She climbed onto Drogon's back in a single fluid motion, heart pounding with adrenaline. Drogon roared, as if sensing the upcoming feast of battle. The black dragon launched into the air, sweeping low over the water. Behind them, Rhaegal rose into the sky with Jon astride him, the green dragon's wings beating powerfully. Daenerys felt a wild surge in her veins, the combined might of 2 dragons bearing down on the Iron Fleet. Euron's lookouts raised a clamor. Scorpion crews scrambled to swivel their siege weapons skyward. But they had expected only Drogon, crippled by the assumption that Rhaegal was out of commission. Instead, 2 dragons soared upon them, splitting in different directions. Daenerys guided Drogon in a wide arc. Jon took Rhaegal down the opposite flank. The black water churned beneath them as the monstrous warships tried to reorient. Euron himself sprinted along the Silence's deck, shouting commands. Daenerys could almost see the fury twisting his features as he realized the deception. Scorpion bolts hissed through the air, narrowly missing Drogon by a hair's breadth. Daenerys felt the rush of wind from each near miss, each bolt that could snuff out a dragon's life in an instant. She pressed her knees into Drogon's flanks, urging him faster. Drogon let out a roaring burst of flame, bathing the side of a smaller warship in dragonfire. Wood crackled and exploded, men screamed, and the ship began to sink in a massive plume of steam and smoke. Daenerys felt a grim satisfaction. One less scorpion aimed at her children. On the other flank, Jon and Rhaegal streaked through the sky, the green dragon belching greenish-yellow fire. A scorpion bolt lanced toward them, but Rhaegal banked sharply, the projectile grazing his wing membrane, leaving a shallow tear. Jon's heart slammed in his chest. Yet Rhaegal pressed on, undeterred, unleashing a cone of flame that obliterated another ship's deck. Euron's men howled as they perished in searing heat or leapt into the water. High on the cliff, Tyrion's archers launched flaming arrows at the chaos below, setting rigging and sails alight. The pincer attack worked. With attacks from the dragons above and the archers from the sides, the Iron Fleet found itself pinned. Still, Euron's flagship remained a danger. The Silence boasted multiple scorpions mounted on swivels. Daenerys spotted them reloading, training on Drogon. She dived, barely dodging a volley of bolts. One missed by mere feet, whizzing past Drogon's neck. Another smashed into the ocean in a burst of spray. She guided Drogon in a sweeping climb, intending to come around from behind. But Euron's men were well-drilled. They swung the scorpions around faster than she anticipated. A bright flash, a bolt soared upward. Drogon twisted, but the projectile clipped his shoulder, tearing through scales. Drogon roared in pain, wings beating frantically. Daenerys clutched the saddle, nearly thrown off by the sudden pitch. She fought to keep Drogon under control, heart hammering with terror at the sight of black blood spattering the sky. Another volley soared up, and Daenerys braced for impact. Then a thunderous roar shattered the air. Rhaegal dove in from above, raining fire onto the Silence's scorpions. Crew members screamed and scattered. The siege weapons erupted in flames, metal twisting and popping in the inferno. Euron lurched away, cursing, as the upper deck became a conflagration. With the threat momentarily neutralized, Daenerys urged Drogon away, letting him recover from his wound. Jon pressed Rhaegal's attack, strafing the Silence with another burst of flame. The heat singed the sails, and the entire vessel creaked ominously. Euron, maddened by rage, hurled a spear of his own at the dragon, but it fell short, splashing into the sea. On the cliffs, Tyrion's catapults launched another wave of fiery projectiles. The ocean around the Iron Fleet glowed with the reflection of burning ships. Gradually, the Iron Fleet's formation crumbled. Those not engulfed by flame tried to flee, but the coastline and reefs limited their escape routes. One by one, ships were either incinerated, sunk, or forced aground. Euron's flagship, battered by repeated strikes, began listing to one side, water gushing through her hull. Yet Euron refused to yield. He raged on the deck, eyes fixed on Rhaegal overhead. Daenerys circled back, ignoring the pain in Drogon's shoulder. She guided her black dragon into one final pass at the Silence. Flames spewed forth, bathing the ship's stern in fiery destruction. Screams tore the air, wood splintered, and the once fearsome flagship began to sink in earnest. Euron clung to the prow, howling curses at Daenerys and Jon. He brandished a crossbow as if hoping to land one desperate shot, but the swirling smoke and chaos made his efforts futile. A final wave crashed against the burning hull, and the Silence vanished beneath the surface, dragging Euron Greyjoy down with it. When at last the flames began to subside and the surviving ships drifted, crippled, or deserted, Daenerys pulled Drogon away from the billowing smoke. She hovered in the air, scanning the wreckage. Rhaegal wheeled beside them, breathing heavily but very much alive. Jon looked at Daenerys across the gap, relief flooding his features. She offered a small, exhausted smile in return. The trap had succeeded. Euron Greyjoy and his scorpions were no more. Below, cheers erupted from the surviving decoy ships and from the cliffs. Men waved banners, roaring their triumph. Daenerys felt her chest tighten with exhilaration and profound relief. She stroked Drogon's neck, silently thanking him for his courage. His black scales were scorched in places, but no mortal wounds, thank the gods. Then she turned her gaze to Rhaegal, the resurrected dragon who had saved Drogon at a crucial moment. A wave of gratitude and love surged through her. He had come back from death, and now he had proven beyond any doubt that he was not broken. As they soared back to shore, the sun broke through the haze of smoke, its beams washing over the triumphant pair of dragons, mother and nephew, queen and once-dead beast, forging a tableau that stirred the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Daenerys guided Drogon into a careful landing on the beach, while Jon brought Rhaegal down beside them. Soldiers rushed forward, unsteady on shifting sand. Some turned their attention to the scattered wreckage washing ashore, apprehending any survivors. Others simply sank to their knees, overwhelmed by the spectacle they had just seen. Jon slid off Rhaegal, stumbling slightly as he hit the sand. Daenerys dismounted Drogon, moving to check his bleeding shoulder. Tyrion, Davos, and Grey Worm arrived, out of breath and eyes shining with victory. "Euron's dead," Tyrion said in disbelief. "Or if not dead, at the bottom of the sea. The Iron Fleet is destroyed." Davos grinned, a rare sight. "Aye, and all thanks to the 2 dragons. A miracle if I ever saw one." Daenerys managed a weary laugh. "We have Rhaegal to thank for saving Drogon from that scorpion. He truly is reborn." Jon placed a hand on the green dragon's flank, feeling the intense heat beneath the scales. "Good boy," he murmured. Rhaegal snorted softly, almost in response. Jon then turned to Daenerys, voice low. "We did it. No more scorpions to fear. At least from Euron." She exhaled, nodding. "One enemy down. One left to go." Her gaze lifted toward the distant horizon where King's Landing lay. "Cersei is all that stands between us and the throne now." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Then we press our advantage. The seas are open to us again, and morale is on our side. We should strike King's Landing before they can muster more scorpions or form new alliances." Davos agreed. "The city's supplies are strained. If we blockade them, they may capitulate. Or we can go for a swift, decisive siege." Grey Worm nodded solemnly. "Missandei is still in their grasp. We must act swiftly." Daenerys' eyes blazed with a fierce mixture of vengeance and longing. "Yes," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "We will bring Cersei to her knees. We will free Missandei and spare the innocent people of King's Landing if we can. But I will have that throne. I will have justice." A chorus of assent rose from those gathered. The beach glistened with surf tinged by blackened debris and scattered wreckage from the slain Iron Fleet. Smoke curled into the sky, a testament to the might of dragons reborn. As Daenerys looked upon Rhaegal, resurrected by the hand of a red priest, forging a deeper bond with Jon, she felt a trembling sense of destiny. They were on the cusp of reshaping the 7 kingdoms, guided by the fire of dragons that refused to be extinguished, no matter what death or fate conspired against them. The final battle loomed, but today, at least, the tide of war had turned in their favor. Daenerys, Jon, and their dragons stood triumphant on the shore, etched in sunlight and smoke, heirs to fire and blood, proving that even death could not break a Targaryen bond. And as the sun climbed higher, bathing the realm in gold, the promise of a new dawn felt closer than it ever had before. Daenerys Targaryen stood on the shore of Dragonstone with the salt wind whipping her hair, gazing at the remains of Euron Greyjoy's fleet drifting in flames. Broken masts jutted from the sea like blackened bones, and the briny air carried the stench of burning pitch. Though smoke still billowed upward, the sunlight broke through in places, gilding the waves with a bright, dancing glow. Drogon and Rhaegal both bore wounds from the ferocious battle, but they lived, alive and roaring in triumph. The once broken Rhaegal had proven himself not only whole again, but essential, arriving in the final moment to save Drogon from a scorpion bolt that might have repeated his fate. It felt like an omen of victory, a reminder that the dragons, and House Targaryen itself, might be destined to endure every trial. Yet even in that moment of exhilaration, Daenerys' elation warred with her grim awareness that their fight was far from over. She pressed a hand to Drogon's heaving side, where a scorpion bolt had clipped his shoulder. He shook off her touch with an impatient groan, as if resentful of her worrying. She looked over to Jon Snow, who stood near Rhaegal, chest rising and falling with exertion. Her green dragon was similarly marked, carrying fresh scrapes and a shallow tear in the wing membrane. The beach was crowded with soldiers, many of them cheering as the battered decoy ships came limping back into the cove. Flaming debris still floated in the distance, yet a wave of relief had washed over the Targaryen loyalists. Euron Greyjoy and his monstrous scorpions would trouble them no longer. Tyrion Lannister approached across the sand, stepping around driftwood and soggy ropes. His fine hair was dampened by sweat, face drawn from the stress of the engagement. Yet he wore something akin to a smile. "Your Grace," he said, stopping at a respectful distance, "I doubt even Cersei could have predicted such a crushing defeat for her ally. With Euron dead, the seas are ours again." He surveyed the smoldering wrecks. "We should see to the survivors. Some may surrender. Others might be hostages with useful information." Daenerys nodded. "Grey Worm will handle it. What we need now is to solidify our advantage before Cersei can regroup. She's likely still holed up in the Red Keep, gathering fresh scorpions. We mustn't let her replicate Euron's modifications." Tyrion inclined his head. "We'll plan a swift strike, though we should consider any potential for negotiation. Sometimes a siege can break a city, but a well-placed word can break a queen. Cersei might be forced to parley if she believes the city itself at risk." Daenerys' lips pressed into a thin line. "I'll consider all options. But I've learned that mercy with her often leads to betrayal. She's used innocence as shields before, and she still holds Missandei." Her voice wavered slightly on her friend's name. "She must not think I'll hesitate." Jon stepped to Daenerys' side, Rhaegal looming behind him, smoke and salt clinging to the dragon's scales. "We'll find a way to free Missandei," he said in a quiet, steady voice. "And we'll do it without razing the city if we can. That doesn't mean we won't defend ourselves. But let's try to remember the innocents behind those walls." Daenerys' gaze snapped to his, some flicker of frustration in her eyes. She remembered how the people of Westeros had greeted her arrival with fear, how they whispered that she was the Mad King's daughter. Time and again, she had tried to prove herself different. But the road had been paved with betrayal, by Cersei, by Euron, by the very lords she sought to liberate. Still, she drew a breath, letting her anger settle. "Yes," she said, a quiet edge in her voice, "we will. I've no desire to be my father." Jon gave her hand a brief, encouraging squeeze. For a moment, they stood there, Targaryens joined in private understanding. Then Daenerys pulled away, focusing on the logistical concerns. She left Jon with Tyrion to handle the captured enemy survivors while she oversaw Drogon's wounds, ensuring the great beast was tended by the handful of healers under her command. Rhaegal, too, received attention, though he bore fewer injuries. Daenerys watched from a distance as Jon coaxed the green dragon to accept a poultice pressed against the torn membrane of his wing. Rhaegal grumbled, smoke curling from his nostrils, but he allowed it, eyes half-lidded. It struck Daenerys how natural they appeared, man and dragon, as though Jon's presence was every bit as comforting to Rhaegal as her own. She was grateful, in truth, for that. The bond forged by the Red Priest's ritual had saved Drogon in a moment that might have spelled disaster. Daenerys could still hear Drogon's roar of agony when the bolt grazed him, see the flicker of green scales diving in from above. Her heart had lurched with simultaneous terror and hope. They had been on the brink of tragedy again, and once more, the tide had shifted. As the day wore on, Dragonstone's Cove became a staging ground for the aftermath of their sudden strike. The battered decoy ships were salvaged. Their surviving crew was carried ashore to be fed and bandaged. Men scanned the wreckage for drowned or wounded foes. Some of Euron's sailors, desperate to avoid drowning, had clung to planks or debris until they were dragged onto Daenerys' beach. A few defied capture with curses, though most showed resignation once they realized Euron's flagship had sunk. Grey Worm moved among them, silent and grim, organizing them into lines for questioning. Some would be locked away, others might be pressed for intelligence. Daenerys allowed it, though she had little time for petty revenge. She only wished to isolate whatever knowledge these captives might have about the situation in King's Landing. More than a few had heard rumors about Qyburn's new scorpion designs, or about the Golden Company reinforcing the walls. Several repeated the same grim tidings. Missandei was still alive, but the Queen's men spoke openly of using her as a bargaining chip. When Daenerys learned of those whispers, her throat constricted. She found Tyrion in conversation with Davos near the old seawall. "I won't let her be used that way," Daenerys said at once, the words tumbling out with quiet ferocity. "Missandei is more than my advisor. She's my friend. She's kind. She's loyal. She's part of our family." Tyrion pressed his fingertips together, choosing his words carefully. "We want her free as much as you do, Your Grace. But Cersei's threat is real. She must be planning a demonstration of power. If she thinks it will deter us, she might go so far as to threaten Missandei publicly. Daenerys's breath quickened. She wouldn't dare kill her if she hopes to use her as a bargaining chip. Davos, arms folded, added in a low voice, Cersei might not be rational about it. She'll do what best serves her immediate hold on the throne. She's proven she'll kill anyone who becomes an inconvenience. Nothing is certain. Daenerys swallowed, fighting a swirl of anguish. Then I must reach her before it's too late, she insisted. We can't waste time. Tyrion and Davos exchanged glances. Tyrion grimaced and nodded, which is why we must proceed quickly to King's Landing. The Iron Fleet is gone. The waters belong to us if we choose. We can sail around the city and blockade Blackwater Bay to prevent supplies from reaching the capital by sea. Meanwhile, our land forces can approach from the Rose Road. We coordinate a two-pronged assault. With luck, the Golden Company is not yet fully prepared. Daenerys gripped the parapet, knuckles blanching. She pictured King's Landing sprawling across the horizon, the Red Keep towering in the sunshine and hidden within her friend. I won't let her die at Cersei's hands, she repeated. Gather the War Council. We leave within 2 days, no longer. Tyrion nodded once, then set off to make arrangements. Davos lingered, brow furrowed. We'll do our best, my queen, he said gently. Then he too departed. Daenerys stood alone for a moment, letting the wind cool her flushed face. A swirl of doubt plagued her. She thought of the many times she had tried to spare innocents, to break the chains that bound them. Yet each victory seemed to cost her the same coin: heartbreak, betrayal, or loss. Now she faced the greatest test of all, wresting the Iron Throne from Cersei Lannister without becoming a monster. But beneath all that, the single name repeated in her mind like a prayer: Missandei. If there was still a chance to save her, Daenerys would risk everything. She turned from the parapet, heading inside the keep to find Jon. They had to talk strategy, and she wanted to be sure Rhaegal's injuries could tolerate the next battle. Indeed, they had to plan carefully, no more ambushes that might cost her another child. At least, not if she could help it. She found Jon in the courtyard, kneeling beside Rhaegal's vast foreleg while the healers carefully bound up the tear in his wing with a salve-smeared bandage. The dragon lay on his side, chest rising in a steady, contented motion as though trusting the presence of these men simply because Jon was there. The hair on Jon's temples was damp with sweat, and flecks of ash stained his dark tunic, but he looked determined rather than weary. How is he? Daenerys asked, her tone softening as she approached. Jon stood, wiping his brow. I think he'll be ready to fly again by tomorrow morning. The tear isn't too deep. He'll feel some pain, but it won't ground him. His gaze took in her tense shoulders. Are you all right? Daenerys shook her head once, letting out a quiet, humorless laugh. I have no right to complain about my own aches and bruises when we have another battle on the horizon. But no, I'm not entirely all right. I'm worried about Missandei, about the city, about everything. She paused, eyes tracing the slope of Rhaegal's massive ribcage. It seems we never get a moment's peace. First the Night King, then Euron, now Cersei in her fortress. Jon's expression darkened at the mention of the Night King. He gave a solemn nod. We've been fighting one war or another for so long, it feels like we don't know how to do anything else. But maybe, once this is over, we can finally breathe. Daenerys' lips curved in a sad smile. That's what I told myself about Meereen. That after I broke the wheel there, I'd rest. But I never did. I came to Westeros instead. She caught herself, forging a more resolute expression. However, I will finish this. And if it means showing Cersei no mercy to save Missandei and protect the realm, I'll do it. Jon touched her arm. We'll try to spare as many as we can. We've both seen what happens when the innocent are caught between powers. We can be better than that, Daenerys. She looked up into his eyes, words momentarily caught in her throat. She remembered the love that once flared between them, still glowing somewhere beneath the weight of secrets, his true parentage, the tension over who had the stronger claim. But she would not bring that to the fore now, not when so much else demanded their focus. Instead, she nodded and squeezed his hand. We'll do what we must, she said. Then she glanced at the healers finishing Rhaegal's bandages. Let's hope Rhaegal's new bond with you helps keep him safe, for both our sakes. Jon gave a curt, determined nod. He saved Drogon. Now we have 2 dragons for the final assault. That might be enough. Daenerys bit her lip. It has to be. They stood side by side, the tang of salve mingling with the salt air, neither speaking of the darkness coiled in each of their hearts, the fear that no matter how carefully they planned, more lives would be lost and the realm's final impression might be of fire and blood, not liberation. Even so, they clung to the fragile hope that they could end the war quickly and rescue Missandei before Cersei inflicted her final cruelty. By sunset, the War Council had convened within the Great Hall at Dragonstone. The painted table loomed in the center, lit by torches set in iron brackets on the walls. Daenerys stood at the head, with Jon at her right. Tyrion hovered on her left, while Varys, Grey Worm, Davos, and the Red Priest Moro formed a ring around them. Overhead, the shadows of carved dragons danced in the flickering light. The atmosphere was tense yet purposeful. Tyrion rapped his knuckles on the carved representation of King's Landing. "The plan is straightforward," he began. "Our main fleet, what remains of it, will blockade the Blackwater Bay. The Iron Fleet's threat is gone, so we should meet minimal naval resistance. At the same time, our land forces under Grey Worm will march up the Rose Road. The Dothraki outriders will harass any Lannister or Golden Company patrols, preventing them from scouting effectively. We converge on King's Landing from both land and sea, forcing Cersei to spread her defenses. Meanwhile, the dragons can strike from above, targeting any scorpions she has prepared." Daenerys studied the small carved towers that indicated the city's walls. "What about the gates? If the Golden Company holds them, we'll face a slow, bloody siege." Varys adjusted his cloak. "The people inside King's Landing are suffering. We've had word that food is running low, and Cersei's conscripted thousands of citizens to help fortify the walls. If you demonstrate overwhelming force, it's possible they might open a gate or at least riot from within. But that's a gamble." Davos planted a callous finger on the table. "Aye, it is. But if we can land a strong blow against the city's outer defenses, it might break their spirits quickly. We also have to consider Missandei. The longer we hold off, the more time Cersei has to do something rash." Tyrion tapped the table again, this time near the coastline. "There's also the Dragon Pit. It's a strategic high ground, though it's mostly in ruins. If you take control of that vantage with the dragons, you could threaten the Red Keep directly." Daenerys felt a slow burn of determination. "We'll do just that if it becomes necessary. But I want scouts ensuring that Qyburn hasn't hidden more scorpions along the city's heights. We can't repeat the ambush that killed Rhaegal once." Moro, the Red Priest, stepped forward, robes rustling. "I will pray for the dragon's protection, Your Grace. Lawleress' blessing won't shield them from every arrow, but the flames of the Lord of Light rest favorably upon you." Daenerys offered a curt nod. She still felt wary of relying on magic. It had cost her in the past. But she remembered vividly how Rhaegal had been pulled from the depths. Some small flicker of gratitude remained for this man, even if she mistrusted what his motivations might be. "Pray if you must," she said. "But our real defense is caution and swift action." Grey Worm folded his arms, his face a stony mask. "We are ready to fight. The Unsullied will hold the line. The Dothraki will ride. Just say when." Daenerys looked around at the grim faces: Tyrion, Varys, Davos, Moro, Grey Worm, Jon. Each had fought their own battles to stand here. Each carried scars of the wars behind them, from the long night to the burning of Lannister supply lines. She allowed herself a moment to appreciate their commitment. Then she spoke, her voice clear in the hush. "We sail and march in 2 days. Use the time to rest, resupply, and see to the wounded. After that, we begin our final push. By the week's end, I mean to stand before the walls of King's Landing and demand Cersei's surrender. If she refuses," Daenerys' jaw tightened, "then we do whatever it takes to protect ourselves and free this realm." The council dissolved. People filed out, speaking in hushed tones, and Daenerys found herself in the hush of the painted tables hall, the carved shape of Westeros flickering with shadows. She traced the coastline leading to King's Landing, feeling the surge of destiny coil in her chest. She was close now, so close to the throne she had dreamed of taking since she was a girl. But she knew the seat of power was meaningless if she lost her soul in the process. She recalled her promise to end tyranny, to break the wheel, and to ensure no more innocent children cried out in terror as she once had. Late that night, she climbed the winding stairs of Dragonstone alone, heading for the ramparts above the courtyard. The sky was clouded, blocking out all but a few faint stars. The fortress below was mostly quiet, save for the watchfires and the occasional clang of a blacksmith's hammer. She stopped near a high balcony, letting the wind whip at her cloak. Memories of her earliest days here filled her mind, discovering the Dragoglass caves with Jon, forging alliances with the North, facing the Night King's threat. So much had changed since then. Her illusions about a straightforward conquest had shattered. She had lost a dragon only to have him restored by blood magic. She had discovered secrets about Jon's heritage that threatened to undermine her claim. She had watched friends and warriors die. And now, at the brink of her greatest battle, she felt the swirl of conflicting emotions, determination, dread, grief, hope. She thought of her unborn child lost years ago, the Dothraki she had lost in the War for the Dawn, the advisors who had died along the way, Ser Jorah, who would have given everything to see her crowned. What would they say if they saw her now? She heard a footstep behind her. Turning, she found Jon Snow approaching, the faint torchlight revealing his somber expression. He paused a few paces away as though uncertain whether to come closer. Finally, he did. The wind ruffled his dark hair. In the silence, they looked upon each other with a mutual understanding that words could not fully express. Then Jon spoke, voice subdued. "It's quiet tonight. Feels strange after what happened at sea." Daenerys nodded. "The calm before the next storm. We'll march soon and more blood will be spilled." Jon stepped beside her, leaning on the stone balustrade. "You've borne a terrible burden for so long, Dany. Sometimes I wonder if you've had any chance at a normal life." She laughed softly, a humorless sound. "No. I was an exiled princess bouncing between the palaces of those who wanted to use me or kill me. Then I became Khaleesi, then Mother of Dragons. Always there was a crisis, an enemy, a war. This is the only life I know." Jon said nothing for a moment, letting the crash of distant waves fill the pause. Then he quietly asked, "And after this war, what do you want?" She turned to face him fully, the wind tugging silver strands of hair across her face. For a moment, she saw the reflection of torchlight in his eyes, the man she had once loved without reservation, before learning of his parentage, before the tension of claims and loyalties. "I want the Iron Throne, yes," she said, "but not for power's sake alone. I want to shape a realm where no little girl has to live in fear, where no one is enslaved, where families don't starve under the weight of tyrants. But every step seems to be drenched in blood. I can't decide if that's the price or if there's a better way I haven't found." Jon reached up, gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The faint gesture of intimacy made her chest tighten. "I believe in you," he said, voice thick. "I've seen you free people. I've seen you risk your life to save strangers. We might not have all the answers, but I know you're no tyrant." She closed her eyes at the warmth of his reassurance. "Let's hope Westeros sees it that way too. My ancestors left a legacy of terror and madness." Jon gave a faint, wry twist of his lips. "Your father was mad, but you're not him. I see that every day." He paused, stepping back slightly. "As for me, I've never wanted the throne. I don't want to rule. I've told you that." "I know," she whispered, remembering the rift that threatened to break them when his lineage came to light. "But your name, your blood, it matters to these lords and ladies. If they see you as a more legitimate heir." "I won't challenge you," he said firmly, cutting off the thought. "You have my word. I bent the knee for a reason." Daenerys studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt. She saw only sincerity tempered by sadness. Slowly, she inclined her head. "Then after we take King's Landing, we'll settle this realm together. We'll show them a better way." He nodded, eyes reflecting the flicker of torches. For a long moment, they shared the hush of the rampart, each grappling with private fears and hopes. Then Daenerys spoke again, more subdued. "Thank you, Jon. I'm grateful." He gave her a small, tight smile. "We need each other." In the silence that followed, a swirl of memories pulled at Daenerys, how they had come together after the battle against the dead, how the revelation of his parentage had driven a wedge of uncertainty between them, how Rhaegal's death and resurrection had reshaped their sense of destiny. She took a breath, then gently placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. They stood that way for a few breaths, neither confessing love nor denying it, simply holding onto a shred of warmth in a world grown perilous. Then the wind whipped again, and Daenerys withdrew her hand, turning to gaze upon the dark horizon. King's Landing lay out there, hidden by distance and shadow, but the memory of its spires lit a spark in her eyes. When dawn broke, Daenerys was already awake, coordinating preparations for their departure. Over the next 2 days, the battered Targaryen fleet was repaired as best it could be, sails patched and hulls reinforced. The Unsullied formed ranks on the shore, loading supplies into wagons. The Dothraki gathered in restless clusters, their horses stamping in the sand, eager for the promised spoils of war. Moro offered blessings in the name of Lawler, sprinkling incense that cast pungent trails of smoke across the encampment. Some men bowed their heads to the Red God, others refused to be near him. Jon and Daenerys made final rounds to ensure everyone was prepared. Rhaegal's wing bandage was removed, leaving a faint scar but allowing full motion. Drogon bore a shallow wound on his shoulder, healing well enough for flight. At the end of the second day, the horns sounded across the beach as the army began to move. Daenerys stood on the prow of her flagship, once a captured vessel from Euron's ill-fated raid, and watched as the sails unfurled overhead. Grey Worm commanded the soldiers on deck, while Tyrion and Varys manned the quarterdeck, relaying signals to the rest of the fleet. In the sky, Drogon and Rhaegal circled, occasionally landing on the mast or diving to skim the waves as though hungry for the next confrontation. Those who could not sail marched along the coastline, led by Davos and Dothraki outriders. Their plan was to reunite near the Blackwater Rush, then approach the city in unison. A sense of inevitable climax weighed on every heart. This was the final march, the last push for the Iron Throne. Daenerys stood tall, letting the wind whip her cloak, silver hair streaming behind her. Jon was on another ship, ensuring Rhaegal had enough space to land if needed. They exchanged glances across the water from time to time, each silently reaffirming the promise to fight together, to save Missandei, to end Cersei's reign. The voyage took just under 2 days, the ships hugging the shoreline in case of unexpected ambush. But none came. Euron's fleet had been their main naval threat, and with it gone, the path seemed clear. As they neared King's Landing, the ships split into 2 groups as planned, one to blockade the harbor entrance, the other to sail upriver and secure any supply routes. Daenerys' vessel drifted closer to the city, giving her a partial glimpse of the familiar skyline. Once she had seen it from atop a dragon, imagining how she might swoop down in fiery conquest. Now, she felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Rage for how they had taken Rhaegal's life, sorrow for Missandei's predicament, and a cautious desire to avoid widespread slaughter if it could be helped. At last, they anchored near the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. The capital sprawled in the distance, the Red Keep perched like a predator on its hill. Smoke from countless chimneys rose in thin columns. Daenerys joined Tyrion, Varys, and Grey Worm on the quarterdeck, scanning the city walls. Already, she could see Lannister banners hanging from ramparts, though from this distance it was hard to make out details. "We'll send riders to contact Grey Worm's land forces," Tyrion said, "then approach the gates together. A formal demand for surrender might give them pause, or at least buy us time to locate Missandei." Grey Worm nodded once, expression grim. "If they have not harmed her, Cersei will pay if they have." Daenerys' voice was cold as steel. "She'll pay either way." She turned to Varys. "Ensure your whisperers inside the city are ready. If there's any chance of them smuggling Missandei out safely, we'll take it." Varys bowed. "I'll send the Raven at once, Your Grace." As darkness fell, the Targaryen forces established camps along the riverbank, well out of range of any scorpions that might be mounted on the city walls. Patrols scouted the terrain. The next morning, the land contingent arrived, reuniting with the fleet. Soldiers bustled to fortify a main camp, anticipating the siege. Daenerys felt the tension in the air, how men gripped their swords and cast wary glances at the city in the distance. It loomed, large and silent, as though daring them to come. But signs of fear were evident. From spyglasses, the watchers reported that peasants had flocked behind the walls, possibly forced inside so that Daenerys would risk mass casualties if she attacked. She spent much of that day perched on Drogon, scanning the city from high in the sky. Rhaegal, bearing Jon, took to the clouds as well. They flew wide circles out of range to gauge scorpion placements. Indeed, scorpions bristled along the outer walls, though fewer than expected. Perhaps Qyburn had only begun constructing new ones after Euron's prototypes. Nonetheless, Daenerys refused to underestimate them. One good shot could be lethal to Rhaegal or Drogon. On the second day of their arrival, Daenerys and her advisors decided to send a herald to the gates, demanding Cersei's presence, or at least a parley. They prepared a small contingent of Unsullied, led by Grey Worm, with Daenerys and Jon overhead on dragons. Tyrion came along, hoping his status as a Lannister might influence the negotiations. The rest of the army remained behind, ready to advance if hostilities broke out. The group approached the city walls at midday, the sun high in a cloudless sky. Banners snapped in the breeze along the battlements, where rows of archers stood with arrows nocked. Daenerys and Jon landed well beyond arrow range, letting the dragons prowl across a patch of open field. The sight of 2 dragons caused visible stirring among the defenders, some lowering their bows in fear, others stepping forward with bravado. Far above, the Red Keep spires glimmered. Daenerys' heart clenched at the sight of the fortress she had dreamed of reclaiming. A single gate opened and a small party emerged, escorted by gold-cloaked guards. At their head, riding a white horse, was none other than Qyburn, looking every bit the unnatural presence that he was, a man of once masterly bearings with cold, pale eyes. He halted 100 yards from Daenerys' force, letting his horse paw the ground. Grey Worm advanced with 3 Unsullied at his side, stopping a short distance from Qyburn, while Tyrion took a half-step forward, arms spread to show he held no weapon. "We demand to speak with Cersei," Tyrion called. "Bring your queen forth." Qyburn smiled thinly. "Her Majesty is indisposed, but I speak with her authority. What does the so-called Dragon Queen seek?" Daenerys stepped closer, Drogon's low growl resonating behind her. Her voice carried across the field. "I seek the safe release of Missandei of Noth, whom you hold prisoner, and I demand your queen's surrender. In return, I offer clemency to the city's inhabitants. No further blood need be spilled." Qyburn's gaze flicked to the dragons, then back to her. "Her Majesty has no intention of surrendering her rightful throne to a foreign usurper. She invites you to lay down your arms and depart. Otherwise, she regrets that your friend's life is forfeit." Daenerys' anger flared and she took one step forward, ignoring Tyrion's cautioning hand. "Where is she? If you harm Missandei, you will all burn." Qyburn lifted his chin. "Her Majesty does not respond well to threats. She wanted me to extend a different invitation here." He paused, as if taking pleasure in the moment. "She asks that you approach the city if you wish a demonstration. She has Missandei on the walls." Grey Worm's knuckles whitened on his spear shaft. "Ty!" Ryan's face paled. Daenerys felt her breath hitch, fear wrestling with fury. She recalled the image of her friend, gentle and loyal, forced into captivity. "You will regret any harm," Daenerys began, but Qyburn cut her off. "That is Her Majesty's word. Approach if you choose. But the next time we meet, it will be steel or fire." Then, with a quick tug on the reins, Qyburn turned his horse and rode back through the gates, leaving Daenerys, Tyrion, and Grey Worm in simmering disbelief. Tyrion exhaled sharply. "This is a trap. She wants you to get close enough to the walls. Perhaps she thinks you'll do something rash, or she'll lure Rhaegal or Drogon into range of a scorpion." Grey Worm's voice was taut with urgency. "If Missandei is truly on the walls..." Daenerys' eyes burned. She imagined the slender figure of her friend, arms bound, terror in her face. They had faced so much together, from Slaver's Bay to the Long Night, only for her to be taken by Cersei in a cruel twist of fate. "We'll see," Daenerys snapped. "Mount up. If Missandei is out there, we have to try." Tyrion swallowed. "Daenerys, please be cautious. They'll expect you to charge in and burn the gate. We need a plan." Daenerys cast him a furious glare. "My friend is in danger. I can't just sit here." Before Tyrion could protest further, she turned to Drogon, who spread his wings, roaring. In a single fluid motion, she climbed onto his back, ignoring the ache in her own limbs. Jon opened his mouth to speak, but she was already aloft, guiding Drogon upward. Rhaegal followed, with Jon gripping the makeshift saddle. The Unsullied below could only watch, helpless to keep up, as the two dragons ascended and soared toward the city walls. At a distance she deemed safe, Daenerys hovered, letting Drogon's wings buffet the air. She scanned the ramparts, heart pounding. There, near the top of the main gate tower, a cluster of guards stood. A single figure in a pale gown, hair coiled in braids, arms bound by rope, stared out at them. Daenerys' throat constricted as she recognized Missandei, her skin looking pallid from captivity. She was flanked by Lannister guards, and behind them, Cersei Lannister stood in regal black and gold, with an eerie smile curving her lips. Qyburn was off to one side, along with a row of archers, and, just as Tyrion had feared, several scorpions angled precariously. Even at this height, Daenerys could see the glint of their steel-tipped bolts. Jon brought Rhaegal alongside Drogon, but kept a slight distance, enough to maneuver if the scorpions took aim. "She's there," Jon said grimly over the rush of wind. "Cersei's put her in plain sight." Daenerys' chest felt hot with fury, the very audacity of flaunting Missandei's capture as bait. "If I try to burn them from here, they'll kill her," she said, voice rough with anguish. "If I swoop down, they'll take Rhaegal or Drogon with their scorpions. or they'll threaten Missandei the moment we draw close." Jon's expression was bleak. "Cersei's counting on that. She wants you to act rashly." Daenerys forced her anger down, trying to think. There was no easy rescue. Any approach risked Missandei's life. The Scorpions looked well placed to shoot a dragon if it attempted a quick snatch. Yet every moment she hovered here was another moment Cersei held the advantage. Glancing down, Daenerys saw Grey Worm, Tyrion, and a party of Unsullied stepping closer to the gate, apparently hoping to negotiate anew. Tyrion, hands raised, was shouting something at the guards. The tension along the battlements was palpable, archers with arrows half-drawn, Scorpion crews twitching with anticipation. With a sudden, ringing cry, the gate tower parted to reveal another figure emerging from behind the parapet. It was the Mountain, a hulking mass of armor, helmet gleaming. He dragged Missandei forward by her bound wrists until she teetered at the edge of the stone walkway. One push would send her plummeting to the courtyard below. Cersei held up a hand as if orchestrating a macabre performance. Even at a distance, Daenerys could see her lips moving, though she could not catch the words. Missandei trembled, her eyes searching the skies for Daenerys. The heartbreak in that gaze cut Daenerys like a knife. A wave of cold dread washed over her. She remembered when the Night King had stolen Viserion or when Euron's bolts took Rhaegal. She was on the brink of losing yet another loved one. Drogon let out a roar that shook the air as though responding to Daenerys' anguish. Jon circled on Rhaegal, scanning the walls for any opening. But the Scorpions twisted menacingly and the Lannister guards aimed crossbows. Any sudden flight downward would result in a hail of bolts. Daenerys closed her eyes, desperation pounding in her ears. She had to do something, some show of force or cunning. She recalled Tyrion's caution that Cersei might kill Missandei at the slightest provocation. But if she did nothing, Missandei was already as good as gone. Opening her eyes, Daenerys glanced at Jon, and in that shared look she saw the reflection of the same horror and helplessness. Then, with excruciating slowness, Cersei stepped toward Missandei and said something to her, words Daenerys could not hear. The Mountain placed a meaty hand on Missandei's shoulder, gripping tight. Time seemed to slow. Daenerys wanted to scream, to dive in, to incinerate them all, Scorpions be damned. But she knew the outcome that would bring. Helplessness twisted inside her. A sense of unreality clouded her vision. From below, Tyrion shouted a final plea, voice cracking with desperation. Daenerys could not make out the words, but she saw him step forward, ignoring the threat of archers. Cersei's face, glimpsed over the top of the crenellations, held a triumphant sneer. She nodded once to the Mountain. He raised his sword. Daenerys' scream caught in her throat. Missandei looked skyward, and then the sword fell. Daenerys watched, frozen by shock, as Missandei's body sagged. The Mountain shoved her forward. She plunged from the walkway, hitting the lower wall with a dull thud and landing somewhere out of sight, presumably in the courtyard or the moat below. The hush that followed seemed absolute, as if the entire world had paused to bear witness. Then a low cry tore from Grey Worm, audible even at this distance. He collapsed to his knees, trembling with grief. Tyrion staggered, burying his face in his hands. The Lannister guards lifted crossbows in case anyone attempted a charge. But no one moved. Above them, Cersei's wicked smile was the last thing Daenerys saw before she turned and walked away from the parapet, leaving the battered body of Missandei behind. Daenerys' heart shattered in that moment. Rage and despair collided, surging like molten steel through her veins. Tears blurred her vision, but she gripped the saddle on Drogon's back, forcing herself not to swoop down and unleash every ounce of flame. She could see the Scorpions tracking her. Jon stared at her, pale as a ghost, shaking his head as if to caution her against a suicidal charge. Every instinct in her screamed to avenge Missandei right then, to burn the red keep to ash, to destroy every last guard who had laid a hand on her friend. But some deeply buried sense of survival, of duty to the realm, held her in place. If she died now or lost the dragons, all her promises would die with her. The people would be left to Cersei's cruelty forever. She gave a sharp signal. Drogon turned, wings flapping, carrying her away from the gate. Rhaegal followed. From below came the anguished wails of her soldiers, the silent heartbreak of those who had known Missandei's kindness. Daenerys felt numb, as though her entire body was encased in ice. She could hardly breathe. Everything she had feared Cersei capable of had just been proven in the most callous, brutal manner. The memory of Missandei's eyes in those final seconds would haunt her forever. Jon circled nearer, calling out, "Daenerys!" The wind tore at his voice, but she heard the anguish in it. "We have to regroup." She nodded woodenly, tears carving hot paths down her cheeks. Rage uncoiled in her chest, unstoppable. She pressed her lips into a trembling line, vowing silently that she would bring ruin to Cersei's door. Yet she needed to plan to ensure Drogon and Rhaegal did not fall to the Scorpions. More than anything, she needed to keep her vow to break the wheel, though at this moment, she wanted nothing more than to break Cersei. Every fiber of her being burned with that single desire. They returned to camp under a pall of silence. News spread quickly. Cersei had executed Missandei. Grey Worm was inconsolable, his grief manifesting in stunned, furious silence. The Unsullied stood like statues, fists clenched on their spears, tears streaming down stoic faces for the translator who had once shown them gentleness. Tyrion retreated to a dark corner of the command tent, quivering in shock. Varys said little, though his sad eyes spoke volumes. Davos, too, looked shaken. Moro, the Red Priest, moved among the soldiers offering whispered prayers, though Daenerys could not bear to look at him. If Rhaegal was so powerful, why had he not saved Missandei? Night fell, and a cold wind blew across the Blackwater. Daenerys convened the War Council again, though the atmosphere was charged with heartbreak and fury. She stood at the head of the painted table, fists clenched on the carved edges, knuckles white. When she spoke, her voice was tight, barely controlled. "Cersei has proven that no surrender will stay her hand. She murdered my friend in cold blood. She invites destruction. So that is what she will receive." She looked around at the council, daring any to contradict her. "We attack at dawn. The dragons and the army will hit the main gate. Scorpions be damned." Tyrion's voice emerged, trembling with sorrow. "Your Grace, please? If we storm the gate blindly, the casualties will be immense on both sides." Daenerys shot him a withering glare. "You saw what she did. She paraded Missandei like a trophy. You think I should wait and let her kill more of my people? We tried reason, Tyrion. We tried parley. There's no more room for mercy." She paused, voice catching. "She gave me Missandei's head. I'll give her fire." Varys bowed his head. "I share your grief, your grace, but let us consider the innocent populace. They're trapped within the city. Many did not ask for this war." Daenerys' rage flared. "I never asked for this war either, yet here we are. My entire life has been war, fleeing assassins, fighting slavers, battling undead. I have tried, time and again, to spare the innocent. But Cersei leaves me no choice. If I do nothing, she grows stronger. If I hold back, she takes more. How many must I lose? Ser Jorah, Viserion, Rhaegal almost, now Missandei." Her voice cracked. "My mercy has cost me too much. Let her see what real fear looks like." Silence pressed down. Jon cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Daenerys, I understand your anger. I feel it too. But if we burn the city, we'll lose everything we stand for. We can strike, yes, but with precision. We have 2 dragons. We can target the Scorpions, break the gates, corner the Lannister forces. The city might surrender once their queen is cornered. We don't have to turn the streets into a massacre." She glared at him, but beneath the surface, some part of her recognized the wisdom. Blind fury would accomplish nothing but rivers of blood. Even so, the heartbreak in her chest demanded vengeance. She closed her eyes as if wrestling with her own reflection. "Then let us strike the Scorpions first. We break down the walls, we crush the Golden Company. Once the city sees Cersei cannot protect them, they may open the gates. Anyone who surrenders lives." She paused, voice going dangerously quiet. "But if they fight for her, they die with her." Tyrion mustered his courage to speak. "As you command, my queen. But I beg you, if you see the city yield, call off the attack." She did not respond immediately, letting the tension draw out. Then she inclined her head in a single, crisp nod. "Very well. We'll watch for surrender. But I won't hesitate to unleash Drogon and Rhaegal if they force my hand." She turned away from the painted table, leaving them to finalize details. The council parted, each to their tasks, positions for the siege, lines of approach for the Dothraki, vantage points for the dragons. Grey Worm left in grim silence, not trusting himself to speak after Missandei's death. Tyrion lingered, shoulders slumped, as if haunted by the inevitability of the coming slaughter. Varys retreated to his corner, expression pensive, no doubt pondering if there was still a path to peace. And Jon went after Daenerys, catching up to her outside the tent. In the darkness, lit by scattered torches, he gently touched her shoulder. She spun around, eyes moist with tears she refused to let fall. "What is it?" she demanded, her anger mingling with heartbreak. He searched her face. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I know how much she meant to you." Daenerys swallowed hard. "Then help me get justice. Help me end Cersei before she kills anyone else. I can't take another death, Jon." He bent his head in acknowledgement. "We'll do it together. Strike fast, destroy the Scorpions, let the city see there's no victory in continuing the fight. Maybe they'll lay down their arms." She let out a shuddering breath, torn between savage wrath and the desire to remain the queen she had once imagined herself to be. "I hope so," she whispered. "But I'm prepared if they don't." Jon pressed his lips together. "I understand." He glanced around, noticing the watchful eyes of unsullied sentries. In a softer tone, he added, "I'll lead the ground assault if that's what you wish. Rhaegal and I can help from above, but I can also rally the men if we breach the gate." She met his gaze. "Lead them," she said. "Rhaegal will stay with you or follow your command if you need him. Drogon and I will take down as many Scorpions as possible. Once the gate is open, we'll see how the city responds." Jon nodded and pressed his forehead gently against hers, an embrace of solidarity rather than romance. She closed her eyes for an instant, letting the warmth of his presence remind her she was not alone. Then she pulled away. "Dawn," she repeated. "Let's end this." The camp buzzed through the night with final preparations. Tense whispers passed among the soldiers. Rumors of Missandei's execution drifted from group to group, fueling anger and sorrow. Some said the city would fall easily, that the people hated Cersei enough to fling open the gates. Others whispered that Qyburn had monstrous contraptions waiting. A few prayed to the Seven or the Red God or the Old Gods for deliverance. Daenerys walked among them, as she once had done in Essos, reminding them of her vow to free the realm. But tonight, her voice sounded hollow to her own ears, weighed down by heartbreak. At last, she retired to her tent. Sleep came only in fitful stretches, haunted by images of Missandei's last moments. In the darkest hours, she woke gasping for air. No matter how she tried to calm herself, a savage fury coiled within her, demanding to be unleashed. She was tired of sacrificing the people she loved. She was tired of being pushed, cornered, forced into compromise while her enemies used cruelty without remorse. Perhaps it was time to show them the consequences of provoking a dragon. The vow lingered in her mind as she drifted again into restless sleep. When the first pale glimmers of dawn lightened the sky, horns echoed across the Targaryen encampment. Soldiers sprang to life, donning armor and forming ranks. The Dothraki readied their horses, the Unsullied formed disciplined lines, and the remnants of Daenerys's Westerosi allies, those knights and lords who had sworn to her cause, gathered behind their banners. Davos, Tyrion, and Varys took their positions among the command. Grey Worm led the Unsullied vanguard, face etched in quiet wrath. Jon Snow tightened the straps on his own armor, glancing toward the horizon where Rhaegal perched on a low hill, waiting. Daenerys emerged from her tent clad in battle leathers, her silver braid pinned up. Drogon waited outside, tail lashing impatiently. She paused to scan the assembled soldiers. The hush of anticipation settled over them, broken only by the rustle of banners and the shifting of feet. Tyrion approached, offering a last, pleading expression. "Remember your promise, your grace. If the city yields." She raised a hand, silencing him. "I remember, but Cersei must be stopped, no matter what it takes." With that, she turned to Drogon, hoisting herself onto his back. Grey Worm signaled the march. The army began to move forward, dusty roads crunching beneath their feet. Jon walked at the forefront of a large contingent of Northmen and Unsullied, Rhaegal trailing overhead in a low glide. The approach to the city was eerily quiet. The gates were barred, the walls lined with archers and crossbowmen, but no banners of surrender flew. From the vantage of the forward lines, Daenerys could see the sun glinting off scorpion tips near the parapets. She guided Drogon upward, scanning for the largest clusters of them. The plan was straightforward. She would burn the scorpions, opening a path for the ground forces to breach the gates or scale the walls. If the city surrendered at any point, the horns would be sounded, and the attack would stop. If not, the battle would continue until Cersei was deposed. A single horn blast shattered the stillness. Then everything erupted at once. The the city's defenders loosed a wave of bolts and arrows. The ground shook with the thunder of scorpion fire. Daenerys spanked Drogon sharply, feeling the heat of near misses as wooden shafts whizzed by. A scorpion bolt tore through the air to her left, barely missing her leg. She forced Drogon into a dive, letting his black wings fold. In a heartbeat, they swooped along the outer battlements, unleashing a torrent of dragon fire. The scorching blaze consumed 2 scorpions and their crews in a flash of orange. Stone cracked and screams echoed from the ramparts. Simultaneously, Rhaegal approached from another angle with Jon clinging to the saddle. Though not as large as Drogon, Rhaegal was still a formidable presence, and his green flame bathed a section of wall where archers crowded. Daenerys' heart drummed with fierce satisfaction as she watched those scorpions crumble under the heat. Cersei had not built nearly enough to neutralize 2 dragons at once. Yet the city's defenders fired back with desperate tenacity. A volley of ballista bolts soared upward. Rhaegal twisted away from one, but another grazed his flank, drawing a roar of pain. From high above, Daenerys saw Jon cling tight, refusing to retreat. Rhaegal spewed another blast of flame, scattering the men operating the scorpion that had wounded him. On the ground, Grey Worm's columns advanced behind tall shields, absorbing arrow fire. The clang of steel rang out as the Unsullied engaged the Lannister foot soldiers and hired swords of the Golden Company. Dothraki hordes raced around the flanks, sabers flashing in the early light. Daenerys pivoted Drogon, preparing another strafing run against the scorpions near the main gate. She noted a large golden banner fluttering there, the Golden Company's standard. Their famed elephants were absent, perhaps never arrived or died along the way, but the mercenaries were well-armed and disciplined. Yet they had never faced a dragon's wrath before. Drogon roared, diving low. Golden Company archers scattered, some loosing panicked arrows that bounced harmlessly off Drogon's scales. A rush of fire engulfed them, turning the neatly arrayed lines into chaos. Smoke billowed, mingling with screams. Daenerys felt that savage sense of justice flaring. These were the men who had fought for Cersei's gold, for the woman who had executed Missandei. Let them burn. Within moments, the gate was unguarded. Grey Worm saw the opening and pressed forward, ramming a battering ram against the smoldering timbers. The gate buckled. Dothraki riders poured in, sabers raised, followed by the Unsullied. Smoke and flame spilled into the narrow streets just beyond the walls. Daenerys circled overhead, searching for any sign of a surrender. No horns sounded from within the city, no white flags rose. Instead, scattered pockets of Lannister loyalists or Golden Company mercenaries resisted, lobbing spears and arrows from alleyways. The fighting spilled across cobblestones, men crying out as they fell, blood slicking the ground. Rhaegal soared overhead, trying to neutralize any scorpions that might remain on side walls or rooftops. Jon directed him carefully, mindful of the narrow angles. They blasted a tower near the southwestern rampart where a hidden scorpion launched a bolt that barely missed Rhaegal's neck. Stone collapsed in an avalanche of dust. Daenerys exhaled a tense breath. She wanted to avoid setting entire blocks ablaze, but the scorpions had to be destroyed. Already, the city was echoing with panicked screams as commoners fled deeper into the labyrinth of streets. Some, seeing the dragons overhead, fell to their knees in surrender. Others rushed to find shelter. By mid-morning, the outer defenses were shattered. Daenerys perched on Drogon's back near the ruins of a gatehouse, scanning the city for further pockets of resistance. Jon and Rhaegal landed briefly in a wide courtyard, letting the dragon rest from multiple arrow wounds, though none appeared fatal. Unsullied and Dothraki pressed deeper toward the Red Keep, their war cries mingling with the clang of steel. Tyrion and Davos tried to coordinate the soldiers to minimize collateral damage, calling for surrenders whenever possible. Some Lannister soldiers threw down their arms. Others fought on with desperate loyalty. Overhead, the sky was thick with smoke. Daenerys spotted the tall spires of the Red Keep looming to the northeast, perched on a rocky outcrop that overlooked the city. She knew Cersei would be there, behind thick walls and hidden defenses, possibly with more scorpions. Her friend's blood demanded vengeance. The memory of Missandei's final moment seared Daenerys' mind, fueling her desire to finish this. Signaling Drogon, she took to the air once more, ignoring the ache in her own muscles. She flew swiftly over rows of slanted rooftops, past open squares where fleeing citizens scattered. She saw glimpses of unsullied columns pushing forward, the occasional clang of swords as defenders tried to block them. When she drew near the Red Keep, archers on the ramparts fired a hail of arrows. Drogon hissed, weaving between them, though a few shafts stuck in the membrane of his wing, causing him to roar in pain. The fortress's main gate seemed formidable, a heavy iron portcullis, thick stone walls, towers from which more scorpions might lurk. Daenerys considered her approach carefully. A direct assault risked Drogon. But if she could destroy the gate from above, the ground forces could swarm inside. She saw Rhaegal approaching from behind, Jon leaning low in the saddle. He raised an arm, gesturing. She understood his meaning, coordinate the strike. Circling high, Daenerys let Drogon build momentum. Rhaegal did the same, though his flight was slightly labored. The two dragons swooped in, side by side, unleashing twin gouts of flame upon the Red Keep's outer defenses. Stone superheated and cracked. Arrow slits exploded in shards of rubble. A watchtower, its scorpion unmasked, caught the brunt of Rhaegal's inferno and collapsed inward, burying defenders. Daenerys felt a fierce thrill. The walls of the keep were strong, but not impervious to dragon fire. If she repeated this strike, she could breach the gate entirely. Below, in the lower city, horns began to blow. Daenerys could not tell if it was a sign of surrender or a command for reinforcements. Flames engulfed entire portions of the wall. At that moment, she caught a glimpse of Tyrion and Grey Worm leading unsullied up the main thoroughfare, forging a path with disciplined ranks. The city's defenders were in disarray. If the keep's gate fell, it might be over soon. Then, with Cersei at her mercy, Daenerys could end this war. She urged Drogon into another dive, ignoring the burn in her arms from clutching the saddle. The heat of the city's fires rose around them, stinging her eyes. She saw Lannister soldiers fleeing from the battlements, some leaping into the moat to escape. With a guttural cry, Daenerys signaled Drogon to spew flame across the rampart near the gatehouse. Stone turned molten, sagging with a thunderous crack. Then, in an avalanche of debris, the section collapsed inward. The gate splintered beneath the load, opening a massive gap. Grey Worm's forces charged, pouring into the Red Keep's outer ward. At the same time, another volley of scorpion bolts launched from a hidden tower within the keep's courtyard. Daenerys swerved Drogon, but one bolt struck the base of his neck plating, skittering off with a shriek of metal. Another tore through the membrane of Drogon's right wing, eliciting a roar of agony. He lost altitude, slamming onto a rampart and crushing it beneath his claws. Daenerys nearly tumbled off. She clung to the reins, gasping. Drogon hissed, thrashing his tail. Before the scorpion crew could reload, Rhaegal swooped in from the side. Jon commanded him to scorch the tower. Flames erupted, devouring the scorpion. The structure collapsed in a shower of masonry. Freed from immediate threat, Drogon lurched back into the air. Daenerys thanked whatever gods might be listening that the bolt had not penetrated deeper. She steadied Drogon, feeling his labored breathing through the saddle. They had to finish this quickly, or risk losing him. "One more pass, boy," she whispered, voice husky with emotion. "Then we'll tear out Cersei's heart." Below, the Unsullied poured into the keep's ward, clashing with Lannister loyalists and the Golden Company's final line of defense. Daenerys glimpsed Grey Worm's helmet amid the chaos, and recognized the savage skill with which he dispatched those who blocked his path. Some defenders threw down their swords, begging for mercy. Others fought to the death. The Dothraki, led by a towering blood rider, galloped through a side gate, slaughtering any who resisted. For a heartbeat, Daenerys wondered if they might go too far, cutting down even those who surrendered. But this was war, an ugly final push. Jon landed Rhaegal in the courtyard, leaping off to rally the men. Daenerys saw him shouting for them to hold their line, to accept surrenders. Some listened, hauling disarmed Lannister soldiers aside. Others, inflamed by the memory of Missandei's execution, let their hatred run free. Skirmishes erupted across every corner of the Red Keep's precincts. Daenerys soared above them, scanning for any sign of Cersei. Then she noticed a tall structure at the heart of the keep, likely the Red Keep's throne room entrance, behind thick walls. If Cersei had any sense, she would be there, protected by her Kingsguard and Qyburn's last contraptions. With a quick mental calculation, Daenerys guided Drogon in that direction. She found a large rooftop courtyard that opened onto the throne room. Guards, presumably the Queen's Guard, braced for her approach, scorpion bolts at the ready. Drogon spat a torrent of flame across the courtyard. One scorpion fired a bolt that soared off-target into the sky. Another scorpion was scorched, its crew diving behind toppled blocks. Daenerys pressed the attack, determined to break through. Qyburn emerged from a side archway, his face contorted with fear. Drogon's fire chased him into the shadows. Then a tower behind the courtyard began to topple, weakened by the barrage. Stones crashed downward, burying defenders. The entrance to the throne room was now half exposed through the rubble. Daenerys let Drogon land amid the broken stones, smoke curling from his jaws. She dismounted, ignoring the pain in her thighs and shoulders. Dust clung to her hair, sweat streamed down her neck. She stood in the courtyard, surrounded by ruin. Several of her unsullied, battered and bloodstained, arrived through a shattered arch, clearing debris. "Stay here," Daenerys ordered them. "Guard Drogon." She saw one scorpion that remained partially intact, listing on a collapsed portion of the roof. "Destroy that," she commanded. 3 Unsullied rushed to comply, prying away the bolt and toppling it over the side. Taking a deep breath, Daenerys stepped toward the half-buried door that led into the throne room. If Cersei was inside, Daenerys meant to confront her face to face. Flames crackled in the wreckage. She could hear the distant sounds of fighting echoing through the keep. Gingerly picking her way over fallen beams, she entered a grand corridor. The vaulted ceiling had partially collapsed, sunlight streaming through dust-laden air. Tapestries torn from the walls lay in heaps, smoldering. Bodies, Lannister guards, perhaps, or Golden Company littered the ground, some moaning in pain. Daenerys forced herself to push on, each step a labor of will, her anger and grief fueling her resolve. Missandei's face flickered in her mind, propelling her forward. Then she heard the faint rustle of footsteps echoing in the corridor ahead. Drawing a dagger, Daenerys advanced, each breath tight in her chest. Suddenly, from the gloom, a figure emerged, Qyburn, face streaked with soot, eyes filled with frantic malice. He carried a small crossbow aimed directly at Daenerys. She froze, heart pounding. She had no time to raise a shield or summon guards. His voice rasped, "You think you've won. But the queen is not so easily dethroned." Daenerys steeled herself, lifting her chin. "She's lost. The city is falling." Qyburn bared his teeth in an unnerving facsimile of a grin. "So be it. But if I kill you now, perhaps she can rally what's left. Or, at the very least, avenge her reign." He squeezed the crossbow's trigger. Daenerys flinched, expecting the bolt to tear through her, but at that precise instant, a blur of motion slammed into Qyburn from the side. One of Daenerys's Unsullied had appeared, tackling him to the ground. The crossbow misfired, its bolt clattering harmlessly off the ceiling. Qyburn hit the floor with a sickening crack. His eyes rolled back, blood pooling beneath his skull. Daenerys stared, stunned, as the Unsullied rose to his feet, spear in hand. He gave her a quick nod. "You are needed alive, my queen," he said simply. Then he stepped aside, letting Qyburn's body lie limp on the rubble. Daenerys exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she managed. The Unsullied nodded once more, returning to the corridor to secure the area. She glanced down at Qyburn's glassy eyes. Another life taken in this war. Another marker of Cersei's downfall. She pressed on, stepping over the debris until she reached a familiar set of large doors, half collapsed but recognizable as the entrance to the throne room. She pushed through the gap, half expecting a hail of arrows or a monstrous creation of Qyburn's design. Instead, she found the throne room nearly deserted. The high ceiling was cracked open, letting golden sunlight stream onto the floor. Broken columns and shattered windows lined the walls. At the far end, the Iron Throne sat on a raised dais, its swords gleaming. And before it stood Cersei Lannister, clad in black and red-trimmed armor, the queen's crown askew on her head. Her posture was rigid, eyes wide with panic and defiance. Beside her loomed the mountain, battered by falling rubble but still upright, a monstrous sword clutched in his gauntlet hand. A handful of Lannister soldiers formed a loose perimeter, though their expressions showed more fear than courage. Daenerys stepped forward, heart hammering. The memory of Missandei's death flared in her mind like a dagger twisting in her chest. "This is over, Cersei," Daenerys said, voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Your city has fallen, your forces are broken. Surrender now, and perhaps I'll let you live." Cersei lifted her chin, though her lips trembled. A trickle of blood ran down her temple where debris must have struck her. "You murdered my people," she spat. "Burned my city, all for your thirst for power." Daenerys' rage ignited. "I offered your people mercy. You refused. You showed no mercy to my friend." Her voice shook and she took another step. "Look around you. You've lost. You can't talk your way out of this." Cersei's gaze darted around the ruined throne room as if searching for an escape route. The distant booms of battle had grown faint, suggesting the fighting outside was nearly done. At her side, the mountain shifted, an imposing silhouette of death. Cersei's voice turned pleading, albeit laced with venom. You wouldn't dare kill me here. That throne belongs to my family. We built this city, we made it prosper. You're just a foreign invader with a horde of savages. Daenerys' lip curled. Your father built alliances through fear. You maintained your grip through treachery and cruelty. Now your cruelty has reached its end. She raised her dagger. Step away from the throne, or I'll carve you from it. A flicker of terror passed through Cersei's eyes. She glanced at the mountain, who made a guttural sound. The enormous knight advanced, raising his sword. Daenerys braced herself, though she knew she was no match for that behemoth in single combat. But at that moment, the battered doors behind her burst open, and Grey Worm, flanked by Unsullied, poured in. The Lannister soldiers, seeing themselves outnumbered, dropped their swords. The mountain turned, still prepared to fight, but as Grey Worm leveled his spear, Daenerys could see a trembling in his posture, pure, lethal rage. Missandei's death had transformed him into an avenging fury. If the mountain made a single move to attack, Grey Worm would lunge. Cersei's face tightened. She realized her last line of defense had crumbled. Her guards retreated, kneeling or edging away. The Iron Throne rose behind her like a dark silhouette. For the briefest second, Daenerys felt a pang of awe. This was it, the seat she had dreamed of all her life. But that dream was tainted by the ashes of the city she had partly burned and by the fresh memory of Missandei's murder. Go on, then, Cersei hissed, voice cracking. Strike me down and prove to the world you're no different from me. Daenerys' hand tightened on the dagger. Her heart thundered. She recalled the vow she had made so many times to break the wheel, to show mercy to those who surrender. Did Cersei truly surrender? Or was she mocking Daenerys, pushing her to cross a line that would define her forever? The swirl of conflicting emotions churned. Missandei's face flickered in her mind's eye once more, the terror of that final moment, the heartbreak of a dear friend lost for no reason but Cersei's cruelty. A wave of cold, lethal anger suffused Daenerys. This woman had robbed her of so much, had stolen lives without remorse. Let the realm see that no one could spill innocent blood and walk away unpunished. She advanced. The mountain raised his sword, but Grey Worm lunged in, spear flashing. In a blur of motion, the mountain turned, smashing his massive blade down. Sparks flew as Grey Worm parried. Another Unsullied thrust a spear at the mountain's flank. Metal screeched on metal. Daenerys stepped back, letting her soldiers handle the monstrosity. Her gaze locked onto Cersei, who looked around for a weapon, but found none. Cersei lunged toward a fallen Lannister sword, but Daenerys was faster, kicking it away. Then, with a deft swipe, Daenerys forced Cersei to step back onto the first step of the dais. There, beneath the imposing sight of the Iron Throne, they stood mere feet apart. Mercy! Cersei sneered, though her voice trembled. Where's your mercy now, Dragon Queen? Daenerys stared at her, chest heaving. I gave you a chance to surrender. You refused. You murdered my friend. You threatened everything I've built. Cersei's eyes flashed. I regret nothing. A queen must rule absolutely. Daenerys felt her grip on the dagger tighten. The rancor in her chest demanded she end Cersei's life here and now, for Missandei, for everyone who had suffered. Slowly, she raised the blade, pressing the tip to the underside of Cersei's jaw. Cersei froze, fear warring with fury in her eyes. Do it, she whispered, half choking on the words. The throne room filled with the grunts and clangs of steel as Grey Worm and two Unsullied engaged the mountain. He was terrifyingly strong, knocking one soldier aside, but Grey Worm, fueled by vengeance, ducked beneath a savage swing and drove his spear into the mountain's back. The monstrous knight roared, staggering. Another Unsullied seized the opening, ramming a spear through his chest. With a final gargled growl, the mountain toppled, collapsing onto rubble. Grey Worm yanked his spear free, chest heaving, eyes empty with the hollow victory of revenge. The fight behind Daenerys was done. All attention fell upon the queen with a dagger at Cersei's throat. Cersei was breathing in panicked gulps, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. Daenerys could sense everyone waiting to see what she would do, what kind of queen she would become in the singular moment. She remembered the many times she had chosen mercy, freeing slaves, sparing rebellious lords, and how it had often cost her. She remembered the times she had chosen ruthlessness, burning the Tarlys, unleashing Drogon on the Lannisters, and how it had frightened the realm. Now, after all that had transpired, after losing Missandei, was mercy even possible? Could she let Cersei live? Rage twisted Daenerys' stomach, but she recalled the vow not to be her father's daughter. If she executed Cersei in a show of cruelty, how different would she look from the tyrants she despised? Her mind replayed images of Myreen's freedmen cheering her for breaking their chains, of the Northerners seeing her ride north to fight the dead, of Missandei's unwavering faith in her. Missandei had believed Daenerys was a breaker of chains, not a butcher. Yet Missandei was gone, stolen by Cersei's vile hand. Daenerys pressed the dagger harder, drawing a bead of blood at Cersei's neck. She saw terror dawn in the other woman's eyes. In a hushed voice, Daenerys whispered for Missandei. Then she twisted the dagger aside, slicing open Cersei's cheek, leaving a thin line of crimson. Cersei gasped, staggered. Daenerys grabbed a fistful of her black armor, forcing her to kneel. "Take her away," Daenerys ordered Grey Worm, stepping back, dagger trembling in her hand. "She'll stand trial for her crimes. Let the realm see her answer for what she's done." Grey Worm blinked, uncertain if he had heard correctly. Rage still simmered in his eyes, but he gave a stiff nod. Two Unsullied stepped forward, seizing Cersei by the arms. She slumped, sobbing in a mixture of shock and relief, blood dripping down her cheek. Daenerys turned away, chest heaving, tears burning in her eyes. She had come within a breath of slashing Cersei's throat. But she had stopped. Had she done the right thing? Missandei's face hovered in her mind, and fresh grief overwhelmed her. The war might be over, but the price had been immeasurable. Grey Worm dragged Cersei away, leading her to a secure corner of the throne room. The last of the Lannister soldiers either fled or surrendered. In the hush that followed, Daenerys stood before the Iron Throne. Her footsteps echoed on shattered marble. She looked upon that seat of swords, remembering how it had loomed in every story of her youth. Now it stood battered and partially lit by the sun streaming through the broken roof. Smoke drifted from cracks in the walls, a testament to the fury of the siege. Tentatively, Daenerys reached out and touched one of the twisted blades that formed the throne's arm. It was cool under her fingers, despite the fires burning throughout the city. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel. She thought she saw the flicker of her father's mad grin, or perhaps it was only her imagination. Gently, she lowered herself onto the throne, feeling the cold metal press against her body. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of everything, her triumphs, her losses, the realm's future, settle on her shoulders. She had reached the seat of her ancestors at last. The hush broke when footsteps approached. Daenerys opened her eyes to see Jon standing there, blood-spattered but alive, breathing hard from the battle. His gaze swept the scene, Cersei in chains, the battered throne room, Daenerys seated on the Iron Throne. He moved closer, cautious, though his eyes shone with a mix of awe and sadness. Around them, Unsullied and Dothraki trickled in, staring in hushed reverence or confusion. Tyrion appeared, face-etched with sorrow for Missandei, yet also a faint relief that Daenerys had spared the city from total destruction. "It's done," Jon said quietly, stopping a few paces away. "The city is ours. Cersei's men have surrendered or they've thrown down their arms. Most of the fires are contained." Daenerys let out a shaky breath, feeling the emptiness left by her thirst for vengeance. "She'll stand trial," Daenerys said, voice hollow, glancing at Cersei, who knelt in shackles under Grey Worm's watch. "The world will see her as she truly is." Jon studied her face. "And what will they see in you, Daenerys?" She blinked, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know." He drew closer, laying a tentative hand on the arm of the throne, inches from her own. "They'll see the woman who saved them from the dead, who shattered the tyrant's power without turning the city into ashes. They'll see a queen who overcame her own rage to show mercy when she could have unleashed fire." Her voice caught. "But Missandei is gone. So many are gone. This throne," she looked at the twisted metal. "It can't replace them." Jon gripped her hand gently. "No, but maybe we can build a realm worth living in. For them." She clutched his hand, swallowing back tears. In that moment, she felt the weight of a lifetime of war pressing down on her, and the faint glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could guide Westeros to a better dawn. The throne was hers, but it would never undo the scars or bring back the lost. A Targaryen alone in the world was a terrible thing, she remembered Ser Barristan once saying. Yet she was not alone, not with Jon, or with the men and women who still believed in her, or with the memory of those who had died hoping to see her break the wheel. Around them, the throne room gradually filled with her supporters. Grey Worm, chest still heaving with grief, gave a short bow. Tyrion, looking up at Daenerys with uncertain hope in his eyes, knelt. Varys hovered near the doorway, silent. Dothraki blood riders stepped in, sabers glinting. The hush carried an air of finality, of an epic shifting. Daenerys rose from the Iron Throne, letting Jon steady her when her legs wobbled. She faced the assembled crowd, a swirl of smoke and dust in the air, the echo of distant battles slowly subsiding. She drew a breath, remembering every vow and every heartbreak. "It's over," she said, voice trembling but strong. We have taken the city. Cersei will answer for her crimes. This war ends today. A murmur rippled through the ranks, though some, especially those who had lost loved ones to Cersei's cruelty, seemed torn between relief and the desire for more blood. Daenerys steadied her voice. Let the bells ring so the realm knows it's done. Let the people come forth without fear. We will restore order. Anyone who yields will be spared. Grey Worm said nothing but nodded once. Tyrion's shoulders sagged with relief. Outside, the clang of metal still sounded, but the pitched battles were dying away. Daenerys swayed, exhaustion hitting her, the dagger still clenched in her hand. Jon reached out, gently prying the blade from her grip. She turned to the battered windows of the throne room. Rays of early afternoon sunlight filtered through the haze, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. Beyond lay a city scarred by dragonfire and war, but still standing. Daenerys listened. Slowly, the distant bells began to toll. Each peal echoed across the battered roofs, a signal that the fighting had ended. She closed her eyes, letting that sound wash over her. The city was hers now, but at a terrible cost. A single tear traced down her cheek as she whispered to herself, "I'm sorry, Missandei." No matter how many bells rang, how many people hailed her as queen, that empty space in her heart would never be filled. Still, perhaps she could build a realm that honored her friend's memory. She inhaled, then turned to face the crowd. A new day had begun, and she stood at its threshold, uncertain but determined. Jon lowered his head briefly in respect, and so did Tyrion and many others. Grey Worm, swallowing his grief, lifted his spear in salute. Outside, horns mixed with the bells. Dothraki war cries shifted into celebratory whoops. Daenerys, the blood of the dragon, stood in the silent wreckage of the throne room, battered but unbroken. She let that hush settle within her soul, steeling herself for the immense challenge that lay ahead, to rule without tyranny, to prove she was more than her father's daughter, to rebuild a realm free from the cycle of cruelty that had stolen so many lives. She lifted her chin and spoke, voice echoing in the space where Targaryen kings once held court. The war is done. Now we begin the real work, healing this land and forging a better future. With that, Daenerys stepped down from the dais, taking Jon's hand. Around them, the survivors of her camp parted, half in awe, half in relief. Some wore expressions of sorrow for those lost, others a weary gratitude that the battle was finally over. The realm would not be mended in a day or even a generation, but Daenerys Targaryen intended to try. She walked through the broken throne room doors and out into the shattered courtyard where Drogon roared softly in greeting, Rhaegal perched nearby. The sunlight fell upon her face, and for the first time in a long, long while, she felt not only the sorrow of loss, but a glimmer of hope, fragile as new grass breaking through cracked earth. And so the bells rang, carrying across the city, announcing the dawn of a new reign, a reign born of fire, tempered by grief, and guided, she dared to dream, by the promise that no one else need be bound in chains.